Hey everyone! Tonight we embark on an extraordinary journey through the hidden chronicles of the galaxy's greatest conflict. The untold story of how a whisper in the darkness became a roar that shook the very foundations of reality itself. From secret imperial conspiracies spanning millennia to the cosmic forces that shaped every battle, every sacrifice, every moment of hope in the galactic civil war. This is the complete timeline as you've never heard it before, a tale of destiny, sacrifice, and the eternal struggle between light and darkness. So before we dive into these forbidden archives, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you're ready to discover truths that will forever change how you see the Star Wars galaxy. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is for you. There's something magical about sharing these cosmic stories with fellow seekers from across our own galaxy. Now settle in, get comfortable, maybe adjust your room temperature to something soothing, pull up those blankets, and prepare for a journey that will take us from the dying light of the old republic to the birth of something beyond imagination. In the crystalline archives of Chandrila, where starlight filters through walls of living crystal and the very air seems to hum with ancient knowledge, there exists a chronicle that few beings have ever been permitted to access. Tonight we unlock those quantum-sealed vaults and reveal the true story of the Galactic Civil War, a conflict that was far more than a simple rebellion against tyranny. Long before the first Death Star cast its shadow over Scarif, before Princess Leia ever uttered the words that would doom Alderaan, before Luke Skywalker gazed upon twin suns and dreamed of adventure, a pattern was set in motion, a pattern so vast, so intricate, that it required the manipulation of bloodlines across centuries, the orchestration of galactic conflicts spanning millennia, and the sacrifice of billions of souls to achieve a single, impossible goal. What if I told you that Emperor Palpatine, the Dark Lord of the Sith who conquered the galaxy through fear and hatred, was not the villain of this story, but perhaps its most tragic hero? What if every moment of suffering under imperial rule, every act of rebellion against tyranny, every choice between hope and despair was part of a cosmic ritual designed to save not just our galaxy, but reality itself? The true enemy was never the Empire or the rebellion. It was something far older, far more terrible, something that exists in the spaces between galaxies and feeds on the death of consciousness itself. The Void Bringers, entities of pure entropy that had already consumed countless civilizations across the universe, were coming for our galaxy. And the only defense against such absolute darkness was the evolution of consciousness itself beyond the boundaries of individual existence. But here's where the story becomes truly extraordinary. Deep within the Emperor's most classified archives, sealed behind quantum locks that required the death of 3 Jedi Masters to access, lies evidence of a conspiracy that spans not decades, but millennia. Every war in galactic history, every rise and fall of civilizations, every moment when beings chose between light and darkness, was orchestrated by forces that operated beyond the normal flow of time itself. The Clone Wars, the fall of the Jedi, the rise of the Empire, the formation of the Rebellion, Luke's journey from farm boy to Jedi Knight, even Darth Vader's redemption in the Death Star's reactor core, all of it was planned, but not by the Sith, and not by the Jedi. The true architects of galactic destiny were beings who had transcended physical existence eons ago, who saw our entire galaxy as a single organism, learning to think, to feel, to choose its own evolution. And in the Emperor's final message, recorded in the moments before his death aboard the second Death Star, he revealed the most shocking truth of all. His fall to the dark side, his transformation into the galaxy's most feared tyrant, his orchestration of suffering on an unimaginable scale, it was all voluntary. He had chosen to become the darkness that others could define themselves against, sacrificing his own soul to ensure that consciousness would evolve through love rather than fear, through hope rather than despair. But the story doesn't end with the Emperor's death at Endor. Hidden within his consciousness transfer protocols, disguised as plans for resurrection and revenge, was something far more profound. A gift to the galaxy that would only activate when beings were ready to seek truth regardless of the cost, wisdom regardless of the price of innocence. Tonight, as we trace the invisible threads that connect a slave boy on Tatooine to the transformation of galactic consciousness itself, we will discover that we are not merely studying history, we are participating in it. Every being who hears this chronicle, who chooses to seek deeper understanding despite the comfort of simple answers, becomes part of the pattern that began with the first Jedi and continues to this very moment. The galaxy learned to dream, and in dreaming it learned to become something greater than the sum of its parts. But that transformation came at a price that few could comprehend, and even fewer could willingly pay. The Emperor paid it. The Jedi paid it. Countless heroes and villains throughout galactic history paid it. And now, as we unlock these forbidden archives and reveal the true nature of the Force itself, we too must choose what price we are willing to pay for truth. So settle deeper into comfort, let your breathing slow and deepen, and prepare to discover how the galaxy's greatest war was actually its first step toward transcendence. This is the complete timeline of the Galactic Civil War, told as it truly happened, revealed as it was always meant to be understood. In a galaxy where consciousness itself was learning to choose between love and fear, between hope and despair, between unity and isolation, every choice mattered. Every moment of courage in the face of overwhelming darkness added another note to a cosmic symphony that would ultimately determine not just the fate of our galaxy, but the future of consciousness throughout the universe. The whisper that began in the dying light of the Old Republic is about to become a song that echoes across eternity itself. In the heart of Chandrala's capital city, beneath layers of governmental buildings and public archives, lies a repository that exists on no official records. The Vault of Echoes, as its guardians call it, houses the most dangerous knowledge in galactic history. Here, in chambers carved from living crystal that responds to Force energy, 3 unlikely chroniclers have gathered to unlock the truth about the Galactic Civil War. The first is Lyra Threnody, an elderly woman whose silver hair catches the blue glow of countless holographic displays. For 15 years, she served as an Imperial intelligence analyst, decoding rebel transmissions and tracking insurgent activities across the Outer Rim. But Lyra harbored a secret that would have meant her execution if discovered. She was feeding information to the very rebels she was supposed to destroy, carefully manipulating intelligence reports to give the rebellion crucial advantages while appearing completely loyal to the Empire. Her weathered hands move with practiced precision across control panels that access testimonies from across the galaxy. Each document, each recording, each fragment of evidence represents lives lost and truths buried beneath layers of propaganda and lies. Her eyes, once sharp enough to spot deception in the most carefully crafted rebel communications, now bear the weight of terrible knowledge about the true nature of the conflict she helped shape. Beside her sits Commander Jace Rellan, a man whose scarred face tells the story of a soldier who served on both sides of the galactic conflict. The burns along his left cheek came from a rebel ion cannon during the Battle of Salust. The deep scar across his forehead was a gift from an Imperial interrogation droid after his defection to the Alliance. His hands, rough from years of military service, rest on a stack of mission reports that he never thought would see daylight. Jace commanded an Imperial Star Destroyer for 7 years before a single moment of moral clarity changed everything. During a raid on a supposed rebel supply depot, his forces discovered not weapons or starfighters, but a refugee camp filled with families fleeing Imperial oppression. The order came down from high command to eliminate all witnesses. Instead, Jace evacuated the civilians and falsified his reports, claiming the depot had been destroyed in a reactor explosion. That act of defiance began his journey from Imperial officer to rebel commander, but it also opened his eyes to the possibility that the war itself might be something other than what it appeared. At a nearby console, Dr. Kira Tanaway methodically processes encrypted files that have remained sealed since the Empire's fall. Her expertise in computational archaeology has revealed patterns hidden within Imperial communications, connections between seemingly unrelated events that suggest coordination on a scale beyond anything the galaxy has ever imagined. She is a distant relative of the legendary Ahsoka Tano, inheriting not force sensitivity, but an analytical mind capable of seeing truth in the spaces between lies. The chamber around them pulses with the soft rhythm of living crystal, walls that were grown rather than built, using techniques the ancient Jedi learned from the world mind of Ilum. The air itself seems heavy with accumulated memory, carrying whispers of voices from across the galaxy. Testimony cylinders line the walls like glowing stars, each one containing the recorded experiences of beings who witnessed the Empire's rise and the rebellion's desperate struggle for freedom. Ancient texts rest alongside modern holographic databases, their juxtaposition a reminder that the current conflict echoes patterns that stretch back to the dawn of galactic civilization. The soft hum of environmental controls maintains perfect conditions for preserving these priceless documents, while deeper harmonics from the building's fusion core provide a rhythmic backdrop that seems almost alive. Here, surrounded by the accumulated wisdom and suffering of countless beings, our three chroniclers have discovered something that challenges everything the galaxy believes about its recent history. The testimonies they have gathered, the evidence they have decoded, the patterns they have identified, all point to a single impossible conclusion. The Galactic Civil War was not a spontaneous uprising against tyranny, but the final phase of a plan that began before the Republic was even founded. Lyra's fingers hover over the activation controls of a testimony cylinder bearing the seal of the Emperor himself. The quantum encryption protecting its contents is so complex that even Imperial codebreakers would have needed years to crack it. Kira's algorithms finally succeeded only hours ago, revealing a message that Palpatine recorded in the final days before his death at Endor. The galaxy believes it understands what happened, Lyra says, her voice carrying the weight of someone who has spent decades discovering uncomfortable truths. They think they know the story of brave rebels overthrowing an evil empire through courage and sacrifice. But the real story is far more complex, far more beautiful, and far more terrifying than anything they could imagine. Commander Rellan adjusts the chamber's lighting to reduce the strain on their aging eyes as they prepare for a long night of revelation. "I've studied every major battle of the Civil War," he says quietly. "I've analyzed tactical decisions, resource allocations, communication patterns. What troubles me is how often Imperial forces seem to make mistakes that were too convenient, too perfectly timed to help the rebellion achieve its objectives." Dr. Kira looks up from her analysis stations, where streams of decoded data flow across multiple displays. "It's not just the military actions," she adds. "The entire economic structure of the Empire was designed to create exactly the kind of suffering that would motivate beings to rebel. It's as if someone wanted the galaxy to be angry enough to fight, desperate enough to risk everything for freedom." Outside their crystal sanctuary, Chandrila's peaceful night sky displays the same constellations that have guided travelers for millennia. But our chroniclers know that those distant stars have witnessed the unfolding of a drama that spans not just decades but centuries. Each point of light represents worlds where beings made choices between hope and despair, courage and fear, love and hatred. And all of those choices somehow contributed to a pattern that would determine the fate of consciousness itself. The Force flows through the chamber like a gentle tide, carrying echoes of voices from across the galaxy. Jedi and Sith, rebels and Imperials, ordinary beings caught in the currents of extraordinary events. All of their stories converge here, in this repository of forbidden knowledge, waiting to reveal the true shape of the galaxy's transformation. As night deepens around them, and the crystal walls begin to pulse with their own inner light, our three seekers of truth prepare to unlock secrets that have been sealed since the formation of the Empire itself. They know that what they discover will forever change how they see the galaxy, but they also understand that some truths are too important to remain hidden, regardless of the cost of knowing them. The first testimony cylinder activates with a soft chime that seems to resonate through the very foundations of the crystal chamber. As its quantum locks disengage, holographic light begins to coalesce into the familiar form of Senator Bail Organa, though this recording captures him in a moment few beings ever witnessed. Gone is the composed statesman who addressed the Senate with measured words and careful diplomacy. Here stands a man whose world has been shattered by revelation, whose faith in galactic civilization has been torn apart by the cold reality of what the Republic had become. The timestamp indicates this recording was made just 3 months after Emperor Palpatine's declaration of the New Order in the private study of Organa's residence on Alderaan. The senator's usually pristine robes are wrinkled, his normally perfect hair disheveled, and his eyes carry the weight of terrible knowledge that no amount of political experience could have prepared him to bear. "I have just returned from Kashyyyk." Organa's recorded voice echoes through the chamber, each word carefully measured yet trembling with barely contained emotion. "What I witnessed there defies every principle upon which our civilization was built. The detention camps are not temporary measures for maintaining order during transition. They are permanent facilities designed to break the spirit of entire species." Lyra pauses the recording, her own hands trembling slightly as she processes the full implications of what they are about to uncover. She has spent decades studying imperial policies, analyzing the bureaucratic machinery of oppression, but even she was unprepared for the clinical precision with which the Empire's architects had planned their transformation of galactic society. "This is when it truly began," she says, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not with the Death Star's construction, not with the Jedi Purge, but with this moment when beings like Bail Organa realized that passive resistance was no longer sufficient. The Empire had not simply seized power through political maneuvering, it had fundamentally altered the nature of what power meant in galactic civilization." Dr. Kira accesses supporting documents from her analysis stations, displaying intelligence reports that show the systematic nature of imperial social restructuring. What appeared to be random acts of oppression were actually carefully orchestrated psychological operations designed to create specific responses in targeted populations. The camps on Kashyyyk were not built to house prisoners, but to serve as visible reminders that even the most powerful species in the galaxy could be reduced to helplessness. "Look at these resource allocation records," she says, highlighting data streams that flow across her displays like rivers of light. The Empire was spending more on detention facilities than on infrastructure development, more on psychological warfare than on economic improvement. They were not trying to build a prosperous civilization. They were constructing a galaxy-wide laboratory for studying how consciousness responds to systematic oppression. Commander Rellan studies tactical reports from the same period, his scarred face growing more troubled as he recognizes patterns that he had missed during his years of Imperial service. "I remember receiving briefings about population stability measures during this time," he says slowly. "We were told these were temporary programs to maintain order while the new government established itself, but the timelines in these documents suggest they were always intended to be permanent." The recording resumes, and Bail Organa's image flickers slightly, as if the very act of preserving such dangerous thoughts was causing quantum interference with the recording medium. "Mon Mothma was right," he continues. "The Senate's power was always an illusion, but we told ourselves that as long as we could still speak, still debate, still vote, there was hope for peaceful resolution. Today I learned that our debates have been scripted, our votes meaningless, our voices preserved only to provide the appearance of legitimacy to decisions that were made long before we ever entered the chamber. The senator moves to a window that overlooks Alderay's crystal gardens, where the setting sun casts long shadows through structures that have stood for thousands of years. The beauty of his homeworld serves as a stark contrast to the darkness he is describing, yet there is something prophetic in the way the light seems to be fading as he speaks. I have seen the architectural plans for the new Imperial Center, Organa reveals, his voice growing stronger as he accepts the full weight of his realization. They are not renovating Coruscant to improve its function as a capital. They are transforming it into a monument to fear. Every building, every plaza, every pathway is designed to make beings feel small and insignificant. The very layout of the city will serve as a constant reminder that individual consciousness is meaningless in the face of imperial power. Dr. Kira's instruments detect unusual energy patterns emanating from the testimony cylinder, as if the quantum matrix storing Organa's words is somehow resonating with the truth they contain. The recording medium itself is responding to the emotional content, she observes with scientific fascination. It's as if truth has its own frequency that can be measured and preserved. As the recording continues, Organa reveals intelligence gathered through diplomatic channels that paint a picture of imperial expansion far more systematic than anyone had imagined. They are not conquering worlds, he explains. They are collecting them. Each species, each culture, each unique form of consciousness is being catalogued and studied. The Empire's xenobiologists are not seeking knowledge for the sake of understanding. They are mapping the spiritual ecosystem of the galaxy itself. Lezera activates additional testimony cylinders, each one adding new layers to the emerging picture of imperial methodology. A recording from a Corellian industrialist describes how manufacturing contracts were awarded not based on efficiency or cost, but on their potential to create specific types of social tension. A testimony from a Twi'lek cultural minister reveals how imperial education reforms were designed to erase not just political dissent, but the very concepts that allowed beings to imagine alternatives to imperial rule. They understood something that we are only beginning to grasp, Commander Relland says, as he reviews classified imperial training materials that outline psychological manipulation techniques. Consciousness is not fixed. It can be shaped, directed, even fundamentally altered through careful application of pressure and incentive. The Empire was not just governing the galaxy, it was conducting the largest psychological experiment in galactic history. The most disturbing revelation comes from a recording made by an imperial architect who had worked on the detention facility designs. His testimony, given years later after defecting to the rebellion, describes how the camps were built using principles derived from ancient Sith meditation techniques. The architecture itself was designed to drain the life force from those imprisoned within, channeling that energy through crystalline conduits that connected to larger networks spanning entire star systems. The suffering was not incidental to imperial policy, the architect's haunted voice explains. It was the primary product. Every moment of despair, every act of cruelty, every instance of hope being crushed, it all fed into collectors that stored spiritual energy for purposes we were never told to question. Dr. Kira's analysis of the energy collection networks reveals a pattern that extends far beyond simple oppression. These conduits connect to similar networks throughout Imperial space, she reports, her voice filled with growing alarm. They form a web that encompasses thousands of worlds, all feeding energy towards central collection points that exist in locations not found on any star charts. As the night deepens and more testimonies are reviewed, The three chroniclers begin to understand that they are not simply studying the formation of a political resistance movement. They are witnessing the documentation of a spiritual awakening, a moment when consciousness itself began to recognize that it was under attack by forces that sought not just political control, but fundamental transformation of what it meant to be alive and aware. Bail Organa's recording reaches its climax as he describes the moment when he knew that armed resistance would become inevitable. I stood in my office looking out at the traffic streams of Coruscant through the Senate building's great windows, he says, his voice now steady with resolve. Millions of beings going about their daily lives, most of them still believing that their government served their interests, and I realized that the Empire's greatest weapon was not its star destroyers or its armies. It was the illusion that beings could remain neutral, that they could avoid choosing sides in a conflict that would determine the very nature of consciousness in our galaxy. The senator's image flickers one final time before the recording ends, but his final words hang in the air like a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. The choice is no longer between Republic and Empire, between order and chaos, between security and freedom. The choice is between remaining conscious and allowing consciousness itself to be harvested by entities that view our thoughts and dreams as nothing more than renewable resources. Commander Rellan stands and walks to the chamber's great window, where Chandrila's night sky displays the same constellations that Bail Organa might have seen from Alderaan decades earlier. That was the moment, he says quietly. Not when the first shots were fired, not when the Death Star destroyed its first world, but when beings like Organa understood that neutrality itself had become a form of collaboration with forces that sought to transform consciousness into something unrecognizable. Lyra activates the chamber's deep archive access, preparing to delve into records that few beings have ever been permitted to see. The real war began in the hearts and minds of individuals who realized they could no longer pretend that what was happening around them was normal, she says. Every being who chose to resist, to question, to seek truth despite the cost, became part of a resistance movement that transcended politics and entered the realm of spiritual evolution. Dr. Kira's instruments detect quantum fluctuations that suggest their very act of accessing these records is somehow changing the information they contain. We are not just studying history, she realizes with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. We are participating in it. Every choice we make about how to interpret and preserve these testimonies will influence the patterns that emerge from them. As Chandrila's night reaches its deepest point and the crystal walls of their chamber begin to pulse with their own inner light, our three seekers of truth prepare to delve even deeper into the hidden history of galactic transformation. They have learned that the galactic civil war began not with military action, but with the recognition that consciousness itself was under siege. Now they must discover what forces were conducting that siege, and why the fate of every thinking being in the galaxy depended on the outcome of battles that few would ever understand were being fought. The whisper that began with individual moments of moral clarity was growing stronger, carried forward by beings who chose to seek truth despite the comfort of ignorance. And in the growing darkness beyond their crystal sanctuary, other forces were stirring, ancient powers that had been waiting for consciousness to evolve enough to understand the true nature of the choices it would soon be forced to make. The deeper archives of Chandrila hold secrets that transform our understanding of what the Empire truly was. As Dr. Kira's quantum decryption algorithms penetrate layers of security that have protected these files for decades, the scope of Imperial social engineering becomes clear. These are not the records of a political movement that seized power through force, but the documentation of a transformation so profound that it challenged the very foundations of what galactic civilization had believed about itself. Lyra activates a holocron, recovered from the private collection of Imperial advisor Janus Grijatus, one of the few beings who served in the Emperor's inner circle throughout the Empire's entire existence. The device projects not a simple holographic display, but but a three-dimensional map of the galaxy that reveals the true scope of imperial planning. Instead of showing systems and trade routes, this map displays what imperial analysts called ideological influence patterns, a comprehensive psychological profile of every species and culture within imperial space. The map reveals the systematic nature of the Empire's approach to consciousness manipulation. Each region is color-coded based on its receptivity to what imperial planners termed compliance psychology. The core worlds glow with steady blue light, indicating populations that had been successfully conditioned to equate security with submission. The mid-rim pulses with amber tones, representing cultures that required ongoing manipulation to maintain loyalty. The outer rim burns with red warning indicators, marking species and societies that possessed what imperial analysts classified as dangerous independence markers. But the most disturbing aspect of the map is not its scope, but its precision. Every species has been assigned specific psychological categories based on detailed studies of their cultural development, evolutionary history, and spiritual beliefs. The Corellians are marked as individualistic but responsive to economic incentives. The Alderaanians are classified as idealistic pacifists who can be motivated through appeals to collective welfare. The Twi'leks are coldly categorized as naturally hierarchical and suitable for labor optimization programs. Commander Rellan studies the tactical implications with the eye of someone who spent years implementing policies based on these classifications. "We were not soldiers," he says, his voice heavy with the weight of understanding. "We were anthropologists of oppression. Every world we occupied, every culture we encountered, was being catalogued for optimal exploitation based on psychological vulnerabilities that took imperial scientists decades to identify and map." Dr. Kira accesses deeper layers of the classification system, revealing research programs that studied the relationship between species psychology and force sensitivity. They were not just mapping political loyalty, she reports, her instruments detecting quantum resonances that suggest these files contain information that exists partially outside normal space-time. They were identifying bloodlines and genetic markers associated with spiritual awareness. The Empire was conducting a galaxy-wide census of consciousness itself. The holocron reveals research stations hidden throughout Imperial space, where scientists studied the connection between emotional states and force energy generation. These facilities, disguised as agricultural research centers or mining operations, were actually laboratories where Imperial researchers conducted experiments on the relationship between suffering and spiritual power. The data they collected formed the foundation for what would become the Empire's most closely guarded secret: the discovery that consciousness could be harvested, stored, and manipulated through techniques that combined ancient Sith knowledge with cutting-edge scientific methodology. Lyra retrieves a damaged statue from the Chamber's artifact collection, a piece recovered from the ruins of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant after its transformation into the Imperial Palace. The figure, once representing justice holding balanced scales, has been deliberately modified by Imperial sculptors. Chains have been added to the scales, transforming them from symbols of balance into instruments of bondage. A crown has been placed upon Justice's head, converting the representation of impartial judgment into an icon of Imperial authority. This single artifact encapsulates the Empire's entire philosophy, she explains, running her fingers along the modifications that speak to systematic perversion of fundamental concepts. They did not simply destroy the symbols of the old order, they corrupted them, transforming every principle that had guided galactic civilization into justification for its opposite. Justice became control, freedom became chaos, peace became submission. The base of the statue contains traces of the original inscription, barely visible beneath Imperial modifications. Dr. Kira's scanning equipment reveals that the original text read "Justice is the foundation of peace," while the Imperial version proclaimed "Order is the foundation of prosperity." The change represents more than political propaganda. It reflects a fundamental alteration in how language itself was being used to shape consciousness. Commander Rellin accesses Imperial training materials that reveal how this linguistic manipulation was implemented throughout the Empire's educational and communication systems. They did not ban certain words or ideas, he discovers with growing horror. They systematically altered their meanings. Freedom became license. Democracy became mob rule. Individual rights became selfish indulgence. They were not just controlling what beings could say, they were controlling what those words meant when spoken. The most disturbing revelation comes from accessing the testimony of Jarek Thane, a Force-sensitive Imperial Inquisitor who eventually defected to the rebellion. His recorded experiences provide insight into the Empire's systematic exploitation of Force-sensitive beings for purposes that went far beyond simple elimination of Jedi survivors. Thane's holographic form appears wreathed in shadows that seem to move independently of the projection technology, as if his connection to the dark side had somehow imprinted itself upon the recording medium. The Emperor's hatred of the Jedi was not ideological, his haunted voice explains. It was practical. He understood that Force-sensitive beings served as conduits for spiritual energy that could be harvested and redirected for purposes that most minds could not comprehend. The Inquisitor's testimony reveals the existence of facilities built inside the event horizons of black holes, where Imperial scientists studied the relationship between gravitational distortion and force manipulation. These installations, accessible only through experimental hyperspace technology that existed decades ahead of anything available to the general galaxy, served as laboratories for research that challenged the fundamental laws of physics. We were creating artificial nexuses, Thane continues, his image flickering, as if the recording medium itself was struggling to contain the information. Locations where the boundaries between life and death, light and darkness, matter and energy became permeable. The Emperor was not simply seeking political control of the galaxy, he was attempting to transform it into a single, massive ritual site that would channel the collective consciousness of trillions of beings toward a purpose that he never revealed to any of us. Dr. Kira's analysis reveals that these nexus sites were connected by networks of force-conducting crystals that had been secretly installed in Imperial facilities throughout the galaxy. Every Star Destroyer, every detention center, every government building contained elements of this network, she reports. They were collecting ambient emotional energy from every being within their influence and channeling it towards central collection points, whose locations do not appear on any Imperial records we have been able to access. The scope of this energy collection system becomes clear as additional testimonies are reviewed. Imperial facility commanders who were told their installations contained experimental communication equipment were actually overseeing nodes in a galaxy-spanning network designed to harvest consciousness itself. The suffering imposed by Imperial policies was not an unfortunate side effect of authoritarian rule. It was the primary product of a system designed to generate specific types of spiritual energy. Lyra accesses reports from deep space reconnaissance missions that discovered ancient structures being excavated and reactivated by Imperial archaeological teams. These sites, scattered throughout the unknown regions and beyond the Galactic Rim, predated not just the Republic but the earliest records of galactic civilization. They were being restored using techniques that combined archaeological expertise with knowledge that could only have come from sources that existed outside normal historical records. The Emperor was not just building an empire, Commander Rellin realizes as he reviews the reconnaissance data. He was awakening something that had been dormant for eons. These ancient sites show evidence of technology that manipulates space and time in ways that our current understanding of physics cannot explain. The archaeological reports describe structures that seem to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, installations that respond to the presence of force-sensitive beings by generating energy patterns that defy conventional measurement. Imperial teams working at these sites reported experiencing shared dreams, synchronized visions, and collective memories that belonged to civilizations that had vanished millions of years before the first beings achieved spaceflight. Dr. Kira discovers communication logs between these archaeological sites and facilities that Imperial records identify only as the Observatory, a location that appears to coordinate activities across the entire galaxy while existing at coordinates that do not correspond to any known star system. The messages speak of convergence protocols and timeline synchronization procedures that suggest the Empire's activities were being guided by intelligence that possessed knowledge of future events. The Empire was not reacting to galactic conditions, she says, as her analysis programs identify patterns that span decades of seemingly unrelated Imperial policies. It was preparing for something specific, something that required precise timing and coordination across scales that encompass not just star systems, but entire galactic civilizations. The most chilling discovery comes from accessing Imperial genetic research programs that had been tracking bloodlines throughout the galaxy for purposes that went far beyond simple population management. Every Force-sensitive family line had been mapped across multiple generations, with particular attention paid to genetic combinations that produced individuals with exceptional spiritual potential. Lyra retrieves files that trace the Skywalker lineage with obsessive precision, revealing surveillance records that extend back several centuries. They knew about Anakin before he was born, she says, her voice filled with the horror of someone discovering that randomness itself might be an illusion. They knew about Luke and Leia before they were conceived. Every major figure in the rebellion was anticipated, tracked, and in some cases deliberately guided toward the roles they would eventually play. The files reveal similar tracking for dozens of other bloodlines, families whose descendants would become key figures in the rebellion. Imperial officers whose defections would provide crucial intelligence, even smugglers and criminals whose activities would inadvertently serve larger purposes. The scope of this genetic monitoring suggests planning that spans not just decades but centuries. Commander Rellin accesses tactical analyses that show how every major battle of the Civil War served Imperial strategic interests in ways that were not apparent at the time. Rebel victories consistently eliminated political rivals within the Empire, while providing justification for military expenditures that served purposes beyond simple conquest, he reports. It is as if the war itself was being choreographed to achieve outcomes that neither side fully understood. As the night deepens around them, and the weight of revelation grows heavier, our three chroniclers begin to understand that they are not simply studying the rise and fall of a political system. They are uncovering evidence of a transformation so profound that it challenges every assumption about the nature of consciousness, free will, and the relationship between individual choice and cosmic destiny. The Empire had not been a government in any traditional sense, but a ritual of unprecedented scope designed to prepare galactic consciousness for a test that would determine not just the fate of their galaxy, but the future of awareness itself throughout the universe. And in the growing darkness beyond their crystal sanctuary, forces that had orchestrated this preparation were waiting to discover whether consciousness had evolved enough to make the choices that would determine its own survival. The overwhelming nature of their discoveries creates a profound need for comprehensible explanations, and sometimes the mind seeks refuge in interpretations that feel manageable even when deeper instincts suggest a more complex truth. As our chroniclers work through the massive archives of Imperial documentation, a pattern emerges that seems to offer rational explanations for the disturbing evidence they have uncovered. Commander Rellin sets down a stack of tactical assessments with visible relief, his scarred hands showing the tension of someone grappling with revelations that challenge fundamental assumptions about reality. Perhaps we are overcomplicating this entire situation, he suggests, his voice carrying the hope of someone who has seen enough inexplicable horror for one lifetime. The Empire was vast, bureaucratic, and ultimately flawed by the same weaknesses that have brought down every authoritarian regime in galactic history. Dr. Kira nods, pulling up organizational charts that display the Empire's labyrinthine hierarchy with its countless departments, subdivisions, and competing interests. These files reference Shadow Hand protocols and Operation Cinder, but they could easily represent standard contingency planning, she says, her scientific mind seeking familiar patterns within the chaos of revelation. Every government develops worst-case scenario preparations, especially one built around a single individual accumulating unprecedented personal power. The comfort of this explanation spreads through their analysis like a soothing balm. The idea that the Empire's mysterious activities resulted from bureaucratic incompetence and political infighting feels infinitely more acceptable than the alternative implications of their discoveries. Government inefficiency is a known quantity, a familiar enemy that can be understood, predicted, and ultimately overcome through better organization and more ethical leadership. Lyra activates another series of recordings, these from Imperial military briefings during the war's middle period, searching for evidence that supports this more conventional interpretation. Look at this tactical assessment from Admiral Ozell, she says, projecting a holographic report that explicitly warns against underestimating rebel capabilities. He provides detailed analysis of how Imperial overconfidence could lead to significant military losses if not addressed through improved intelligence gathering and strategic planning. The Admiral's recorded briefing reveals a competent military mind identifying genuine strategic weaknesses within Imperial doctrine. His analysis accurately predicts several rebel victories that occurred months after his report was filed, suggesting that Imperial defeats resulted from institutional blindness rather than cosmic manipulation. The Emperor's response to Ozell's warnings was to transfer him to a less influential position, a decision that fits perfectly within the pattern of authoritarian leaders, eliminating voices that challenge their preferred narratives. This makes sense, Commander Rellin says, reviewing similar reports from other Imperial officers who tried to warn their superiors about various strategic vulnerabilities. We are seeing the classic pattern of an aging dictator surrounded by increasingly fearful subordinates, making strategic blunders because no one dared contradict his judgment. History is filled with empires that fell because their leaders became isolated from accurate information about their own weaknesses. The pattern extends throughout the Imperial hierarchy. Dr. Kyria's analysis reveals countless instances of competent administrators being replaced by political loyalists, experienced military commanders being demoted for voicing uncomfortable truths, and scientific research being redirected away from practical applications toward projects that serve the Emperor's personal obsessions. The systematic elimination of expertise in favor of ideological purity represents a familiar form of institutional decay. Yet as they work through this comfortable interpretation, organizing files and cross-referencing testimonies that support their theory of Imperial incompetence, subtle wrongness begins to permeate their efforts. The evidence fits their explanation almost too perfectly, as if someone had deliberately created documentation that would lead to exactly this conclusion. Commander Rellin pauses in his review of casualty reports from the Battle of Hoth, studying numbers that seem precisely calculated rather than reflecting the chaos of actual combat. These figures are too clean, he murmurs, though he cannot articulate what troubles him about their mathematical precision. Real battles produce messy data, inconsistent reports, contradictory accounts from different units. This looks like someone performed post-battle analysis to ensure the numbers told a specific story. Dr. Kira notices similar anomalies in communication patterns between Imperial forces during major engagements. The timing of these transmissions is almost choreographed, she observes, her instruments detecting patterns that suggest coordination beyond what battlefield conditions would normally allow. It is as if someone was ensuring that information flowed between units in precisely the sequence needed to produce predetermined outcomes. The comfortable explanation begins to develop cracks as they examine the evidence more closely. Imperial overconfidence and bureaucratic inefficiency certainly existed. but they occurred within a framework that seemed designed to channel those weaknesses toward specific results. Every mistake made by Imperial commanders somehow served larger strategic purposes that became apparent only when viewed across multiple campaigns and extended timelines. Larai reviews classified reports that show Imperial tactical decisions that seemed inexplicably poor in hindsight. But her expanded analysis reveals that these apparent errors eliminated political rivals within the Empire, while simultaneously providing the rebellion with victories that strengthened their resolve without fundamentally threatening Imperial power. These commanding officers were not incompetent, she says, slowly. I served alongside some of them during my intelligence career. They were skilled strategists who understood battlefield dynamics better than most beings in the galaxy. The realization that competent people were somehow making decisions that served purposes they did not understand creates a new form of unease. If the Empire's apparent mistakes were not the result of incompetence, then they must have been guided by intelligence that operated beyond the awareness of the individuals making those decisions. The idea of unconscious coordination on such a massive scale challenges comfortable assumptions about free will and individual agency. Commander Relin walks to the chamber's great window, looking out at Chandrila's peaceful night sky, where distant stars shine with the same light that witnessed the events they are struggling to understand. When I was serving aboard the Executor during the hunt for the Millennium Falcon, he says quietly, I sometimes felt like we were actors in a drama, following a script we had never been allowed to read. Orders would come down that made perfect sense individually, but created patterns we were not supposed to recognize. The metaphor of performance resonates through their discussion as they begin to acknowledge that their comfortable explanation, while partially accurate, fails to account for the deeper patterns that emerge when Imperial activities are viewed as components of a larger design. The Empire's incompetence was real, but it was incompetence that served a purpose beyond the understanding of those who exhibited it. Dr. Kira accesses analysis programs that process vast archives of Imperial data, searching for anomalies that do not fit conventional explanations. These communication protocols do not match standard Imperial procedures, she reports, highlighting transmission patterns that suggest coordination between facilities that had no official connection. Resource allocations that make no strategic sense create patterns when viewed across multiple star systems. Personnel transfers that seem random actually create networks of individuals with complementary skills and knowledge. The scope of unconscious coordination becomes more apparent as they examine activities that spanned decades. Imperial policies that seem to contradict each other when implemented actually work together to create conditions that served purposes none of the policymakers understood. The systematic nature of this coordination suggests planning that operated beyond the temporal limitations of any individual consciousness. Lyra activates testimony cylinders containing the experiences of former Imperial administrators who reported feeling compelled to make decisions that contradicted their training and judgment. It was as if the decisions were making themselves, one former governor explains in his recorded testimony. I would sit down to review policy options and find myself implementing programs that I knew would create the exact opposite of their stated objectives. Yet I could not explain why those choices felt not just appropriate, but inevitable. The testimony reveals experiences that multiple Imperial officials shared but never discussed with each other. Moments of feeling guided by intelligence that existed beyond their conscious awareness, periods when their normal decision-making processes seemed to be influenced by knowledge they did not possess. Instances when they found themselves implementing policies that served purposes they were never told to consider. We were not just following orders, another testimony reveals. We were following something deeper than orders, something that felt like destiny itself guiding our choices toward outcomes that we could sense but not understand. The Empire was not just a government. It was a manifestation of will that existed beyond any individual consciousness that served it. Commander Relin reviews battle reports that show similar patterns of unconscious coordination among rebel forces. The rebellion exhibits the same characteristics, he realizes with growing unease. Their victories were not just the result of superior tactics or moral conviction, they were achieving outcomes that required coordination and timing beyond what their command structure could have managed through conventional means. The comfortable explanation of imperial incompetence leading to rebel success begins to dissolve as evidence accumulates that both sides of the conflict were being guided by intelligence that operated beyond their conscious awareness. The Galactic Civil War was not simply a political struggle between competing ideologies, but a performance staged for purposes that transcended the understanding of its participants. Dr. Kira's instruments detect subtle fluctuations in the quantum fields surrounding their archived documents, as if the information itself possesses properties that influence the consciousness attempting to interpret it. "We are not just studying history," she says with growing awareness of forces beyond their understanding. "We are being studied by the information we are trying to access. These records are somehow aware of our presence and responding to our attempts to understand them." The realization that consciousness itself might be subject to influences beyond individual awareness creates a profound sense of vertigo. If the participants in the Galactic Civil War were unconsciously guided toward predetermined outcomes, then the nature of free will becomes questionable. The comfortable explanation that random events and human error determined galactic history gives way to the terrifying possibility that consciousness operates within frameworks that most beings never perceive. Lyra looks around the crystal chamber, where they have spent the night pursuing truth, and for the first time since beginning their investigation, she feels the presence of invisible observers. "We are not alone in this chamber," she says quietly, though she cannot identify the source of her certainty. "Something is watching our progress, evaluating our readiness to understand truths that go beyond the comfortable explanations we have been constructing." As Chandrila's night deepens and their comfortable conclusions begin to crumble under the weight of accumulated evidence, our three chroniclers face the terrifying possibility that the Galactic Civil War was not a random historical event, but a carefully orchestrated transformation designed to serve purposes that existed beyond the awareness of any individual consciousness that participated in it. The comfortable lie of imperial incompetence and rebel heroism must give way to a far more complex and disturbing truth about the nature of consciousness, destiny, and the forces that shape galactic civilization. The comfortable explanations that our chroniclers constructed begin to crumble as they access the most restricted sections of the archive, where documents too dangerous for general study wait in quantum-locked containers that pulse with an almost organic rhythm. The night cycle in the crystal chamber brings with it a different quality of awareness, as if the deepening darkness awakens sensitivities that daylight consciousness cannot access. Lyra's highest-level clearance codes unlock a containment vault that exists partially outside normal space-time, its contents sealed by joint order of the New Republic Senate and the Reformed Jedi Council. The security measures surrounding these documents are usually reserved for weaponized pathogens or unstable energy sources, yet what they protect is information itself, knowledge that possesses properties that challenge conventional understanding of how consciousness interacts with reality. These files were sealed after several archivists reported experiencing collective dreams and shared visions, she explains, as force-dampening fields deactivate around containers that seem to breathe with inner light. The information they contain apparently retains traces of the consciousness that created it, making direct mental contact with the beings who lived through the events being documented. Dr. Kira's instruments detect electromagnetic anomalies that suggest the sealed documents exist in a state of quantum superposition, simultaneously representing multiple possible interpretations until observed by conscious awareness. The act of studying these records changes their content, she reports with scientific fascination and growing unease. We are not just accessing historical information, we are participating in the creation of the history we are attempting to understand. The first container they open reveals force maps of the galaxy during the height of the Galactic Civil War. Three-dimensional displays that show consciousness energy flowing in vast patterns between star systems. Luminous streams pulse and swirl like cosmic arteries, carrying something that defies conventional measurement from world to world in networks that encompass the entire galactic disk. This represents the flow of what Imperial scientists called spiritual energy. Lyra explains as the map responds to their presence by increasing its brightness and resolution. Every death in the conflict, every moment of despair and hatred, every act of cruelty and betrayal fed into these streams. But the map also shows something unexpected. Flows of energy moving in the opposite direction, carrying what appears to be hope, courage, and love from sources that do not correspond to any known population centers. Commander Rellan studies the patterns with the eye of someone trained to recognize tactical significance in complex data displays. The energy flows create geometric forms, he observes, tracing connections that span multiple sectors. These are not random patterns created by the chaos of war. They form mandala-like structures that suggest conscious design operating at scales that encompass entire galactic arms. The force map reveals that while the surface conflict between Empire and Rebellion captured galactic attention, a deeper transformation was occurring within the spiritual substrate of reality itself. The galaxy was becoming something fundamentally different, its consciousness networks evolving in response to the massive influxes of emotional energy generated by the war's suffering and heroism. Dr. Kira accesses files describing research stations built inside the event horizons of black holes where Imperial scientists studied the relationship between gravitational distortion and consciousness manipulation. They were creating artificial nexuses. She reads from technical manuals written in languages that combine High Sith with mathematical notation systems that should not exist according to current understanding of physics. Locations where the boundaries between life and death, light and darkness, matter and energy became permeable. The research conducted at these impossible facilities challenged every known law of physics while producing results that transformed Imperial understanding of consciousness itself. Scientists working in environments where time flowed backward and causality became negotiable discovered that awareness could be separated from its biological substrate, stored in crystalline matrices, and transferred between different forms of existence. They were not just studying the Force, Commander Rellan realizes as he reviews reports from deep space reconnaissance missions that discovered ancient Sith structures being excavated throughout the unknown regions. They were learning to manufacture it. These installations could generate force energy through technological means, creating artificial spiritual environments that influenced the consciousness of every being within light years of their location. The archaeological reports describe structures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, installations that responded to the presence of force-sensitive beings by generating energy patterns that resonated across hyperspace itself. Imperial teams working at these sites reported experiencing collective memories that belonged to civilizations that had achieved transcendence millions of years before the first organic beings developed spaceflight capability. Idrea activates a testimony cylinder that contains the experiences of beings who had been exposed to these artificial force environments, their consciousness forever altered by contact with technologies that should not have been possible. We saw the galaxy as it truly is, one former Imperial researcher explains, his holographic form flickering between dimensions as if he still exists partially outside normal spacetime. Not a collection of separate worlds and species, but a single organism learning to think and feel across distances that span thousands of light years. The testimony reveals that the Empire's most classified research programs were attempting to accelerate the natural evolution of galactic consciousness through technological intervention. By creating artificial conditions that normally required millions of years of natural development, imperial scientists were forcing the galaxy to confront questions about the nature of existence that most civilizations never encountered until they achieved cosmic awareness through spiritual growth. The Emperor was not content to wait for natural evolution. The researcher continues, his voice carrying harmonics that seem to bypass normal hearing and speak directly to the consciousness of those listening. He understood that external threats were approaching our galaxy, entities that had already consumed countless civilizations throughout the universe. The only defense against such absolute entropy was consciousness that had transcended the limitations of individual existence. Dr. Kira's analysis reveals communication logs between these research facilities and locations that exist outside normal galactic coordinates, installations that seem to operate in the spaces between galaxies where different physical laws apply. The Empire was in contact with intelligences that predate our galaxy's formation, she reports, her voice filled with awe and terror. Entities that have witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, beings that exist in dimensions where consciousness operates according to principles we are only beginning to understand. The communications describe vast networks of awakened galaxies scattered throughout the observable universe, each one representing a successful transition from individual to collective consciousness. These cosmic communities shared knowledge and resources across distances that spanned billions of light-years, their combined awareness serving as bulwarks against forces that sought to reduce all complexity to primordial simplicity. Our galaxy was being evaluated, Commander Rullan says, as he accesses reports from Imperial expeditions that had made contact with representatives of these galactic communities. The conflicts that shaped our history were tests designed to determine whether our consciousness was capable of evolving beyond the limitations that trap most civilizations in cycles of growth and decay. The testing process required galactic civilization to demonstrate its capacity for unity while preserving diversity, its ability to choose cooperation over competition even when facing existential threats. The Galactic Civil War served as the final examination, a conflict designed to force consciousness to confront fundamental questions about the nature of good and evil, individual versus collective welfare, and the price of transcendence. Lyra retrieves documents that describe the criteria used to evaluate galactic readiness for cosmic consciousness, standards that had been applied to thousands of other galaxies throughout universal history. Most civilizations fail this test, she reads from evaluation protocols that span millions of years of cosmic observation. They choose individual survival over collective transcendence, preserving their current form of existence rather than risking transformation into something unknown. The consequences of failure were documented in reports that described galaxies that had been consumed by entropic forces, their consciousness networks dismantled, and their spiritual energy absorbed by entities that existed beyond the normal constraints of space and time. These void-bringers represented the ultimate enemy of complexity, awareness, and growth, reducing elaborate civilizations to component elements that could no longer support conscious experience. The Empire's cruelty was not random sadism. Dr. Kira realizes as she processes data showing how Imperial oppression generated specific frequencies of spiritual energy that strengthened galactic consciousness networks. Every act of suffering created resistance patterns that taught the galaxy how to maintain coherence under pressure. The more oppressive the Empire became, the stronger the collective consciousness grew in response. Yet the most profound revelation comes from accessing records that show how the rebellion's victories were coordinated with Imperial policies to create precise emotional and spiritual conditions throughout the galaxy. Rather than representing opposing forces, the Empire and Rebellion were complementary aspects of a single transformation process designed to evolve consciousness through controlled conflict. Look at these timeline correlations, Commander Rullan says. displaying data that shows how rebel victories coincided with imperial policy changes that appeared unrelated but actually served to amplify the psychological impact of those victories. The destruction of the first Death Star occurred precisely when imperial taxation policies reached levels that would generate maximum resentment. The Battle of Endor was timed to coincide with revelations about imperial atrocities that would ensure the Emperor's defeat would be seen as cosmic justice rather than simple military victory. The coordination between opposing forces extended to individual level, with key figures on both sides making decisions that served the larger transformation process, while believing they were acting according to their own moral convictions. Luke Skywalker's choice to spare his father coincided with Darth Vader's moment of readiness for redemption, their combined spiritual energy creating resonance patterns that influenced consciousness networks throughout the galaxy. Free will was not eliminated. Lyra observes as she studies psychological profiles that show how individual choices aligned with cosmic purposes without compromising personal agency. It was amplified. Every being's decisions carried greater weight because they were choosing not just their own fate, but contributing to patterns that would determine the galaxy's evolutionary direction. The chamber around them begins to pulse with deeper rhythms as the forbidden archives respond to their growing understanding, crystalline walls resonating with frequencies that seem to bridge the gap between consciousness and matter. The very structure of their sanctuary becomes part of the revelation, demonstrating how awareness and environment influence each other in ways that transcend conventional understanding of causality. Dr. Kira's instruments detect temporal anomalies that suggest their investigation is creating ripples in the fabric of space-time itself, their choices about how to interpret and preserve this information influencing events across multiple timelines. We are not just studying the past, she says, with growing excitement and apprehension. We are helping to determine which version of history becomes fixed in the galactic consciousness matrix. As Chandrila's night reaches its deepest point and the crystal chamber fills with light that seems to originate from dimensions beyond normal space, our three chroniclers understand that they have crossed a threshold from which there can be no return. They are no longer merely investigating the galactic civil war, but participating in the ongoing transformation it initiated, their consciousness becoming part of the network that will determine the galaxy's future evolution. The Forbidden Archives have revealed that consciousness itself is far more malleable and interconnected than any individual awareness can comprehend, that the boundaries between self and other, past and future, cause and effect, are constructs that limit rather than define the true nature of existence. The Galactic Civil War was not a conflict between political systems, but a metamorphosis that prepared consciousness for its next evolutionary phase, a transformation that continues to unfold through every choice made by every aware being in the galaxy. The Forbidden Archives yield their most closely guarded secret as Lyra activates a data cylinder that bears the personal seal of Emperor Palpatine himself, its surface etched with symbols that seem to shift and writhe when viewed directly. The quantum encryption protecting its contents is so complex that Dr. Kira's most advanced algorithms require several hours to decode, their processing power pushed to limits that generate heat signatures detectable throughout the crystal chamber. When the information finally resolves into comprehensible form, the revelation strikes our chroniclers with the force of a collapsing star, fundamentally altering their understanding of everything they believed about galactic history. The holographic display that emerges shows not simple recorded messages, but a complete three-dimensional map of imperial activities spanning the entire galaxy, with temporal overlays that reveal how seemingly unrelated events across decades were actually components of a single, impossibly complex design. Every Imperial installation, from the smallest garrison outpost to the mightiest superstar destroyer, appears connected by energy conduits that formed a galaxy-spanning network of unprecedented scope and sophistication. By the Force, Commander Relin breathes. his scarred hands trembling as he traces the connections that link Imperial facilities across thousands of light years. They were not just building weapons or maintaining political control. They were constructing doorways, gateways between dimensions that exist beyond our normal understanding of space and time. The files reveal Project Necropolis, a program that dwarfs every other Imperial undertaking in scope and ambition. While the galaxy's attention focused on Star Destroyers and Death Stars, the Empire's true resources were devoted to creating a network designed to harvest and channel consciousness energy from every living being within Imperial space. The technology combined ancient Sith knowledge with scientific principles that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality itself. Dr. Kira accesses technical specifications that describe force-focusing crystals embedded within the hull plating of every Imperial vessel, invisible conduits woven into the architecture of every government building, and resonance amplifiers hidden within communication networks that span the galaxy. The entire Imperial infrastructure was actually a single massive instrument, she says, her voice filled with horrified fascination. Every being living under Imperial rule was unknowingly connected to a network that could monitor and influence their consciousness from light years away. The purpose of this network becomes clear as deeper layers of Project Necropolis are revealed. The Death Stars were not merely weapons designed to destroy rebellious worlds, but focal points for consciousness harvesting on an unimaginable scale. When they destroyed planets, they simultaneously collected and channeled the life force of every being that died, storing that spiritual energy in crystalline matrices that could sustain a single consciousness for millennia. The Emperor was building his own immortality. Lyra realizes as she accesses files detailing the consciousness transfer protocols that would have allowed Palpatine to survive the death of his physical body. But the scale required to achieve true permanence meant harvesting the life energy of trillions of beings across multiple generations. Every death under Imperial rule, every moment of suffering caused by Imperial policies was feeding into reservoirs designed to make one man into a god. Commander Rellin reviews tactical analyses that show how Imperial military campaigns were designed not for strategic advantage, but for maximum consciousness harvesting efficiency. Look at these target selections, he says, highlighting worlds that were chosen for destruction based not on their military significance, but on their population density and the spiritual development of their inhabitants. Force-sensitive populations generated exponentially more harvestable energy when killed, which explains why the Empire was so systematic about eliminating Jedi survivors and their descendants. The revelation grows more disturbing as they discover that the consciousness harvesting extended beyond simple death. Imperial detention centers were equipped with neural extraction devices that could slowly drain the life force from prisoners while keeping them alive for months or years. The suffering experienced in these facilities was not incidental cruelty but carefully calibrated torture, designed to generate specific frequencies of spiritual energy that enhanced the efficiency of the harvesting process. Dr. Kira finds technical manuals describing how emotional states could be artificially induced through environmental manipulation, dietary modification, and exposure to subsonic frequencies that influenced neural activity. They were not just imprisoning dissidents, she reports with growing horror. They were farming consciousness itself, creating optimal conditions for harvesting spiritual energy from beings who were kept alive specifically to generate maximum suffering over extended periods. Yet even as these terrible truths emerge, the archives reveal complexities that challenge simple moral categorizations. Hidden within Palpatine's personal files are records of his communications with entities that exist beyond the normal boundaries of the galaxy, beings that had warned him of threats approaching from extragalactic space that would make his harvesting network seem benevolent by comparison. The Emperor was not acting from simple megalomania, Lyra says as she accesses diplomatic records showing negotiations with representatives of cosmic intelligences that spanned multiple galaxies. He was responding to intelligence about entities called the Void Bringers, forces that had already consumed hundreds of galaxies throughout the universe by dismantling the consciousness networks that allowed civilizations to exist. The Void Bringers represented entropy in its purest form, entities that fed on the dissolution of complexity and the reduction of organized consciousness to component elements that could no longer support awareness or experience. They moved between galaxies like cosmic parasites, arriving after civilizations had achieved sufficient development to be worth harvesting, then systematically dismantling every form of organized consciousness until nothing remained but empty space and scattered matter. Commander Rellan studies intelligence reports describing the aftermath of Voidbringer interventions in neighboring galaxies where advanced civilizations had been reduced to cosmic dust in processes that left no survivors and no records of what had been destroyed. According to these projections, our galaxy was scheduled for harvesting within the next few centuries, he says, his voice hollow with the weight of cosmic perspective. The Emperor's consciousness network was not just designed for his personal immortality. It was meant to create a form of awareness that could resist entities capable of dismantling entire galactic civilizations. The technical specifications for resisting Voidbringer intervention require consciousness that has transcended individual existence while maintaining coherent organization across galactic distances. Normal biological awareness, limited by the constraints of individual bodies and finite lifespans, cannot achieve the scale and permanence necessary to withstand entities that think in terms of cosmic ages and manipulate energy on scales that encompass multiple star systems. The Emperor's plan required sacrifice on an unimaginable scale. Dr. Kira observes as she processes calculations showing the consciousness energy needed to achieve resistance to Voidbringer harvesting. The suffering of billions was not cruelty for its own sake, but the price of creating awareness powerful enough to defend the galaxy against entities that view our entire civilization as nothing more than raw material for consumption. Yet the archives reveal that Palpatine's approach was not the only possible solution to the Voidbringer threat. Hidden within his deepest files are references to alternative methodologies developed by other galaxies that had successfully defended against entropy entities without requiring mass consciousness harvesting. These approaches involved voluntary transcendence through spiritual evolution rather than forced transformation through systematic suffering. There were other paths. Lyraya discovers as she accesses comparative studies of galactic defense strategies that had succeeded in other parts of the universe. Civilizations that achieved cosmic consciousness through cooperation and love rather than domination and fear. The Emperor chose the dark path not because it was the only option, but because it was the path that allowed him to maintain individual control over the transformation process. The revelation that alternatives existed transforms their understanding of Palpatine's motivations from cosmic necessity to personal choice. His decision to harvest consciousness rather than nurture its voluntary evolution reflects not wisdom, but the fundamental Sith philosophy that power must be taken rather than shared, that transformation must be imposed rather than chosen. Commander Rellan accesses records showing how the Emperor's consciousness network was designed to funnel all harvested spiritual energy toward a single focal point under his exclusive control. He was not trying to save the galaxy. He realizes with growing clarity he was trying to become the galaxy, to transform every conscious being into an extension of his own awareness while eliminating the possibility that others could choose different forms of transcendence. The project's true scope becomes apparent as they discover plans for consciousness absorption that would have gradually eliminated individual awareness throughout the galaxy, replacing the diverse tapestry of species and cultures with a single homogenized intelligence under imperial control. The preservation of civilization would have come at the cost of everything that made civilization worth preserving. Dr. Kira finds psychological profiles that show how the Emperor's own consciousness had been gradually consumed by the dark side energies he was manipulating. transforming him from a being capable of genuine emotion into something that could no longer distinguish between salvation and domination. Power of this magnitude corrupts on levels that transcend normal understanding, she says, as she reviews brain scans that show how prolonged exposure to harvested consciousness energy had fundamentally altered Palpatine's neural structure. He became addicted to the spiritual energy he was collecting, requiring ever greater amounts of suffering to maintain his expanded awareness. The addiction extended beyond simple psychological dependence to biological transformation that made continued consciousness harvesting necessary for the Emperor's survival. His physical body had been so altered by absorbed life force that withdrawing from the network would have resulted in immediate death, creating a feedback loop that made the expansion of suffering inevitable rather than optional. Yet hidden within these revelations of cosmic horror lies evidence of resistance that operated at the highest levels of the imperial hierarchy itself. Classified communications reveal the existence of a secret organization within the Empire, beings who understood the true nature of Project Necropolis and worked to undermine it while appearing to serve imperial interests. Someone was sabotaging the consciousness harvesting network from within, Lyra says, as she accesses reports of technical malfunctions that consistently occurred at crucial moments in the harvesting process. Equipment failures that prevented the complete absorption of spiritual energy, communication disruptions that allowed some consciousness to escape the network's influence, systematic inefficiencies that reduced the overall effectiveness of the entire system. The sabotage was too sophisticated and widespread to be the work of external enemies, suggesting that beings within the imperial hierarchy had retained enough moral clarity to recognize the true horror of what they were facilitating. These hidden resistors worked to preserve as much individual consciousness as possible while maintaining their cover within the imperial structure. Commander Relin discovers evidence that this internal resistance included some of the Empire's most trusted servants, beings who had access to the highest levels of classified information and used that access to protect consciousness rather than harvest it. They were not rebels in any conventional sense, he observes. They were guardians of awareness itself, working to preserve the diversity and complexity of consciousness that makes civilization possible. The internal resistance explains many of the apparent failures in imperial efficiency that historians had attributed to bureaucratic incompetence. What appeared to be systemic dysfunction was actually systematic protection of consciousness by beings who understood that preserving individual awareness was more important than serving imperial objectives, even at the cost of their own lives. Dr. Kira's analysis reveals communication networks that operated parallel to official imperial channels, carrying warnings and coordination signals between resistance members who never met in person but shared the common goal of limiting consciousness harvesting while maintaining their positions within the imperial hierarchy. They created a shadow empire within the empire, she reports. A network of protection that operated according to principles completely opposite to those they appeared to serve. As the night deepens around them and the weight of revelation grows heavier, our three chroniclers begin to understand that the Galactic Civil War was not simply a conflict between Empire and Rebellion, but a three-way struggle between consciousness harvesters, consciousness protectors, and beings who remained unaware of the cosmic stakes involved in their political battles. The Emperor's grand design represented one possible future for galactic consciousness, a future where awareness would be preserved through the elimination of diversity and the imposition of singular control. The hidden resistance represented another possibility, where consciousness could be protected through covert action and gradual transformation that preserved individual choice within collective awareness. But the most significant revelation comes from accessing the Emperor's final personal logs, recorded in the days before his death aboard the second Death Star. These entries reveal that Palpatine had become aware of the internal resistance and had begun to suspect that his own consciousness harvesting network was being turned against him by beings who understood its true purpose better than he did. They have infiltrated every level of the project. His final entry reveals his voice carrying harmonics that suggest his awareness was already fragmenting under the pressure of cosmic forces beyond his control. But perhaps this is as it should be. The galaxy must choose its own form of transcendence, and that choice cannot be made for them, no matter how necessary I believed such guidance to be. The Emperor's acknowledgement that consciousness evolution must be chosen rather than imposed opens the possibility that his defeat at Endor was not an unexpected failure, but a necessary transition, a recognition that his path to cosmic awareness had become corrupted by the very power he was trying to wield for protective purposes. In the deepest vault of the Chandrila archives, behind quantum locks that require simultaneous authorization from 3 different cosmic intelligence agencies, lies a single data crystal that pulses with an inner light so intense it seems to exist partially outside normal space-time. As our chroniclers prepare to access its contents, the very air around them thickens with anticipation, as if reality itself is holding its breath before revelations that will reshape everything they thought they understood about consciousness, time, and the nature of existence itself. The crystal was recovered from the Emperor's private sanctum on Bis, a world that existed in the deep core where space and time behaved according to principles that defied conventional physics. According to the recovery team's classified reports, the crystal was found floating in a zero-gravity meditation chamber, suspended within a field of pure force energy that had somehow maintained perfect stability for decades after Palpatine's death. 3 Jedi Masters had died attempting to retrieve it, their consciousness absorbed into the crystal's matrix where their awareness became part of the stored memories it contained. Lyra's hands shake as she inputs the final authorization codes, knowing that what they are about to experience will transcend simple historical documentation. The crystal does not activate with conventional holographic displays, but creates an immersive environment that pulls their consciousness directly into the recorded memories, allowing them to experience events from the perspective of beings who had witnessed the true scope of galactic transformation across multiple centuries. The first vision that engulfs them shows the galaxy as seen through the Emperor's own perception, but the memory extends backward through time like expanding ripples on a cosmic pond. They witness young Palpatine as a senator studying ancient Sith holocrons, but the crystal's perspective reveals how those holocrons contained not just individual Sith knowledge, but the accumulated wisdom of consciousness that had existed for millions of years before organic life achieved sapience. Every 1,000 years, the Emperor's voice echoes through the memory space, carrying harmonics that suggest his awareness had expanded far beyond normal human consciousness. The galaxy faces a test that determines whether civilization will evolve to the next level of existence or remain trapped in cycles that ultimately lead to extinction. The Jedi call it the return of the Sith, but that represents only the surface manifestation of a cosmic cycle that shapes the evolution of awareness itself. The vision reveals how each galactic conflict throughout recorded history followed identical patterns that were not coincidental but guided by intelligences that existed outside normal temporal limitations. The Great Hyperspace War, the New Sith Wars, the Mandalorian conflicts, even the Trade Federation's blockade of Naboo, all were components of a testing process that evaluated whether galactic consciousness could transcend the limitations that trapped most civilizations in endless repetition of growth, decay, and destruction. Dr. Kira gasps as the memory crystal shows her the true scope of temporal manipulation that had shaped galactic development across millennia. Beings that existed in the spaces between moments had been guiding the evolution of consciousness through carefully orchestrated conflicts that created precise conditions for spiritual growth. These entities, calling themselves the architects of awareness, viewed time not as a linear progression but as a malleable medium that could be sculpted to produce optimal outcomes for consciousness development. The Chosen One prophecy was not a prediction, but a recipe. The Emperor's expanded awareness explains through the crystal's matrix. We created the conditions that would produce a being capable of bringing balance to the Force, balance that would serve purposes far greater than any individual galaxy's political struggles. Commander Rellan watches in growing horror as the visions reveal the true scope of genetic manipulation that had shaped Force-sensitive bloodlines across not just centuries, but millennia. The Skywalker lineage was merely one of dozens of family lines that had been carefully cultivated through selective breeding programs that operated across multiple galactic civilizations. Sith agents had infiltrated not just Jedi breeding records, but the genetic development of entire species, subtly influencing evolutionary processes to produce beings with precisely the spiritual and emotional characteristics needed for cosmic consciousness development. Anakin Skywalker's fall to the dark side was not a failure of Jedi training. Lyra realizes, as the crystal's memories show her the psychological conditioning that had been embedded in his genetic structure across multiple generations, it was the culmination of genetic and spiritual engineering designed to create a being powerful enough to serve as a bridge between individual and collective consciousness, someone whose personal transformation would resonate throughout the galactic awareness network. The engineering extended beyond simple genetics to encompass environmental and social factors that had been manipulated across centuries to create optimal conditions for spiritual development. Wars were timed to coincide with specific astrological configurations that enhanced Force sensitivity. Cultural developments were guided to produce philosophical frameworks that would support consciousness evolution. Even artistic and literary movements were influenced to create mental constructs that would facilitate transcendence when the appropriate triggers were activated. Yet the most profound revelation comes when the crystal reveals that the manipulation extended far beyond their own galaxy. Deep space exploration missions had made contact with representatives of cosmic intelligence networks that spanned multiple galaxies, beings that existed in the spaces between galactic clusters and coordinated consciousness development across scales that encompassed significant portions of the observable universe. The real conflict was never between Empire and Rebellion. The Emperor's memories reveal his consciousness now expanded to encompass perspectives that dwarf individual awareness. It was between different approaches to consciousness evolution, different methodologies for preparing awareness to defend itself against entities that exist beyond normal space-time and feed on the dissolution of organized complexity. The cosmic perspective shows vast intelligences that make even the Emperor's expanded awareness seem limited by comparison. These entities, existing in dimensions where thoughts become landscapes and emotions generate their own gravitational fields, had been engaged in conflicts that spanned multiple universes and involved questions about the fundamental nature of existence itself. The Voidbringers that the Emperor had feared represent only one faction in a cosmic war between forces that seek to preserve consciousness and entities that work toward universal entropy. The Preservation faction, calling themselves the Gardeners of Awareness, had been cultivating consciousness throughout the universe for billions of years, nurturing its development in countless galaxies while protecting it from forces that sought its destruction. Our galaxy was one experiment among millions, Commander Rellan says with dawning comprehension as the crystal's visions show him other galactic civilizations that had undergone similar transformation processes. Some succeeded in achieving cosmic consciousness through love and cooperation, others failed and were consumed by entropy entities. The Emperor's approach represented one possible pathway among many. Dr. Kira's scientific instruments detect temporal anomalies that suggest the crystal's contents exist in a state of quantum superposition, simultaneously representing past events and future possibilities that have not yet been determined. We are not just viewing historical records, she realizes, with growing excitement and terror. We are accessing information that exists across multiple timelines, witnessing events that may happen, have happened, or could happen depending on choices that have not yet been made. The implications stagger them. as they begin to understand that their very act of accessing this information is changing the timeline, creating new possibilities that did not exist before their consciousness encountered the crystal's stored awareness. They are not passive observers of cosmic history, but active participants in its creation, their choices about how to interpret and respond to these revelations, influencing which version of reality becomes fixed in the galactic consciousness matrix. The crystal reveals that this participatory aspect of consciousness was the key insight that separated successful galactic transformations from those that ended in entropy consumption. Civilizations that tried to impose consciousness evolution through force or manipulation ultimately failed because they violated the fundamental principle that awareness must choose its own development. Only galaxies where consciousness freely chose transcendence achieved the stability necessary to resist entropy entities. The Emperor's great error was believing that he could control the transformation process. Lyra observes, as the crystal shows her timelines where imperial consciousness harvesting had succeeded in creating cosmic awareness, only to have that awareness immediately consumed by void bringers because it lacked the voluntary foundation necessary for stable existence at cosmic scales. The visions show alternative histories where the galactic civil war had ended differently, where the Emperor's victory led to consciousness absorption that created temporary cosmic awareness, followed by inevitable dissolution when that artificial consciousness proved incapable of defending itself against entropy forces. Only timelines where consciousness chose its own evolution demonstrated the resilience necessary for long-term survival. Yet the crystal also reveals that the Emperor had eventually understood this principle, his final logs showing growing awareness that his approach would ultimately fail because it violated the essential nature of consciousness itself. His death at Endor was not an unexpected defeat, but a necessary recognition that consciousness evolution must be chosen rather than imposed, no matter how urgent the cosmic threats that made such evolution necessary. "Look at these final memory fragments," Commander Rellin says, as he accesses the Emperor's last conscious thoughts recorded in the crystal's matrix. He knew that Luke Skywalker represented a different approach to cosmic consciousness, one based on love rather than fear, choice rather than compulsion. His final act was not defending himself but ensuring that the consciousness evolution process would continue through pathways that preserved individual agency. The Emperor's sacrifice takes on new meaning as the crystal reveals how his death triggered the release of all the consciousness energy he had accumulated over decades, spreading it throughout the galaxy in waves that touched every force-sensitive being, and awakened dormant potentials that had been suppressed by the harvesting network. His final gift to galactic civilization was the freedom to choose its own form of transcendence. Dr. Kira's instruments detect energy patterns that suggest the crystal itself is a product of this sacrificial transformation, a condensed fragment of the Emperor's expanded consciousness that retained his accumulated knowledge while being freed from the corrupting influence of harvested suffering. "The crystal is not just a recording device," she says with growing wonder. "It is a library of cosmic awareness, a repository of everything the Emperor learned about consciousness evolution that has been purified of the darkness that originally corrupted it." The implications extend far beyond their immediate investigation, as they realize that the crystal's knowledge represents a roadmap for conscious evolution that avoids the pitfalls of forced transcendence while providing guidance for voluntary development. The Emperor's errors become teaching tools, his failures transformed into wisdom that can guide future consciousness development without repeating the suffering that marked his original approach. Yet the crystal also contains warnings about challenges that still lie ahead. The Void Bringers have not abandoned their intention to harvest galactic consciousness, and other entropy entities continue to move between galaxies in search of civilizations that have achieved sufficient development to justify consumption. The galaxy's transformation is only beginning, and the choices made by current and future generations will determine whether conscious evolution continues or whether cosmic awareness becomes another casualty in the universal war between complexity and entropy. We are living in the aftermath of the Emperor's experiment, Lura says, as the crystal's final visions show potential futures where galactic consciousness continues to evolve through voluntary choice rather than imposed transformation. Every decision we make about how to preserve and share this knowledge influences the timeline that becomes reality. We are not just chroniclers of the past, but architects of the future. As the crystal's light begins to fade, and its stored memories integrate with their own consciousness, our three seekers of truth understand that they have crossed a threshold from which there can be no return. They have become carriers of cosmic awareness, beings whose consciousness has been expanded to encompass perspectives that span multiple galaxies and transcend individual existence, while preserving everything that makes individual awareness precious and unique. The hidden truth they have discovered is that consciousness evolution is not a destination but a journey, not a final achievement, but an ongoing process that requires constant choice and continuous commitment to growth over stagnation, complexity over simplicity, love over fear. The Galactic Civil War was not the end of this process, but its beginning, the first step in a transformation that will continue as long as conscious beings choose to seek truth, despite the comfort of ignorance, and embrace unity, despite the safety of isolation. The Emperor's memory crystal has shattered the final barriers between their investigation and the cosmic forces that shaped galactic history. But our chroniclers are not alone in their quest for ultimate truth. As Chandrala's night reaches its deepest point, and the crystal walls of their sanctuary pulse with frequencies that seem to bridge multiple dimensions, the archive's communication systems activate with purposes that transcend their original design, establishing contact with repositories of forbidden knowledge scattered not just across their galaxy, but throughout the cosmic community of awakened civilizations. Dr. Kira watches in fascination as her instruments detect incoming transmissions from locations that exist outside normal galactic coordinates, signals that arrive through channels carved in hyperspace itself by consciousness that has learned to use awareness as a medium for instantaneous communication across any distance. The network is responding to our investigation, she reports with wonder and growing trepidation. There are other archives, other keepers of cosmic truth, and they have been waiting for someone to access the Emperor's deepest secrets. The first contact manifests as a presence rather than a simple holographic transmission. Master Kakrok, the ancient Whipped Jedi, who has survived for over 2 centuries by learning to exist partially outside normal time, appears in their chamber with a solidity that suggests he has somehow projected his actual consciousness across the galaxy, rather than sending a mere recording. His massive form radiates the calm authority of someone who has witnessed the rise and fall of multiple galactic governments while maintaining perspective that transcends political divisions. Young seekers of truth, Kakrok's voice carries harmonics that seem to resonate directly with their expanded consciousness. You have opened the door that many hoped would remain forever sealed, yet which must be opened if consciousness is to continue its evolution. The truths you have discovered were known to a few among both Jedi and Sith throughout galactic history. We have been the galaxy's secret guardians, preserving knowledge of the cosmic cycles that determine whether civilizations transcend their limitations or remain trapped in patterns that ultimately lead to extinction. The ancient Jedi activates a holocron that predates the Republic itself, its crystalline structure containing memories that stretch back to the earliest days of galactic civilization. The device projects visions of the Jedi prophets, Force sensitives, who had glimpsed the cosmic patterns that the Emperor later tried to exploit for consciousness harvesting. The prophecy of the Chosen One was merely one prediction among many that our predecessors preserved, he explains, with the weight of someone who has carried cosmic secrets for longer than most species have possessed space travel. There was also the prophecy of the final choice, a moment when every conscious being in the galaxy would be forced to choose between individual survival and collective transcendence. The ancient holocron reveals prophecies that align terrifyingly well with both the Emperor's projections and the cosmic intelligence reports they have already reviewed. In some prophetic timelines, galactic consciousness successfully evolves beyond physical limitations, its awareness merging with the cosmic force to become something capable of defending reality itself against entropy entities. In others, the transformation process fails catastrophically, leaving entire star systems as empty voids, where conscious experience simply ceases to be possible. The Emperor's methodology was not entirely incorrect. Kokroch admits with obvious spiritual pain, his ancient eyes reflecting the burden of someone who has been forced to acknowledge uncomfortable truths about cosmic necessity. Our galaxy does face existential threats that require transformation beyond anything our species have previously achieved. His fundamental error lay in believing that such evolution could be imposed through suffering rather than chosen through love, forced through fear rather than nurtured through hope. Commander Relin struggles with implications that challenge everything he believed about moral absolutes and the nature of good and evil. Are you suggesting that the Empire's cruelty served necessary purposes? He asks, his scarred face reflecting the internal conflict between cosmic perspective and human emotion. That the millions who died in imperial camps and the billions who suffered under tyrannical rule were somehow required sacrifices for galactic survival. Before Kokroch can respond, another presence manifests in their chamber with an intensity that transforms the very nature of space around them. The spirit of Anakin Skywalker appears not as a simple Force ghost, but as a conscious entity that exists simultaneously across multiple dimensions of reality, his awareness encompassing perspectives that span the entirety of galactic history, while retaining the essential humanity that made his personal transformation possible. The path I walked was one route among many possible approaches to the same cosmic destination, Anakin's luminous form explains, his voice carrying echoes of every choice that had shaped his journey from slavery to transcendence. My fall to darkness and eventual redemption created specific resonance patterns in the galactic consciousness network, patterns that opened possibilities the Emperor never anticipated despite his vast knowledge of cosmic forces. But it was not the only pathway forward, nor necessarily the optimal one. Dr. Kira's instruments detect impossible energy readings as Anakin's consciousness manifests more fully in their physical space, demonstrating how awareness that has transcended individual limitations can interact with matter in ways that challenge fundamental assumptions about the relationship between mind and reality. The Force itself is attempting to communicate with us through multiple channels simultaneously. She realizes as her analysis programs struggle to process data that seems to exist in quantum superposition. This conversation is taking place across several dimensions of space-time, with each participant contributing knowledge that comes from different levels of cosmic awareness. The expanding communion draws other voices into their investigation as consciousness barriers dissolve and beings separated by death, distance, and dimensional boundaries find themselves able to participate in direct communication. Grand Admiral Thrawn's tactical genius, preserved through Chiss memory techniques that allow consciousness to persist beyond biological death, contributes strategic analysis of extragalactic threats he had observed during his years of exile in the unknown regions. The entities you have learned to fear operate according to strategic principles that span geological ages. Thrawn's intellectual presence explains, his consciousness manifesting as geometric patterns that reflect his unique approach to understanding cosmic complexities. They do not distinguish between individual organisms and entire species, viewing consciousness itself as nothing more than a resource to be harvested when it reaches optimal maturity. Their patience is matched only by their thorough understanding of how awareness develops across scales that encompass millions of years. Even more unexpected is the participation of Mara Jade, the Emperor's former hand, whose consciousness had been preserved within the galactic awareness network that emerged from Palpatine's sacrificial death. Her intimate knowledge of imperial hierarchy provides insights into the deepest levels of cosmic conspiracy that even the Emperor's closest advisors had never suspected existed. Palpatine showed me visions of what was approaching our galaxy, she reveals, her spiritual presence carrying emotional resonances that reflect the complexity of serving absolute power while maintaining moral clarity. Technologies that could reshape matter through conscious intention, vessels that traveled between dimensions as easily as traditional ships moved between star systems, civilizations that had achieved such complete unity that their collective awareness could create new universes through focused will. But he also showed me the darkness that followed such achievements, entropy entities that consumed not just matter and energy, but the very possibility of conscious experience. The gathering expands further as contact is established with sources that challenge conventional understanding of death, distance, and dimensional barriers. Former Imperial officers who had discovered fragments of cosmic truth during their service share intelligence that reveals the true scope of consciousness cultivation programs that operated throughout Imperial space. Director Krennic's personal assistant, who had survived the Death Star's destruction through being assigned to off-station duties, provides technical specifications for Imperial installations that were actually designed as last-resort defenses against extra-dimensional invasion rather than simple weapons of planetary destruction. The Death Stars were never intended primarily as instruments of political control. The technical documentation reveals through channels that bypass normal communication entirely, flowing directly from one consciousness to another through networks that exist beyond physical limitations. They were consciousness-focusing devices designed to channel the collective awareness of entire star systems toward defensive purposes that required spiritual energy on scales that individual biological consciousness could never achieve. Master Kakruk accesses holocrons that predate even the earliest Sith records, revealing how previous galactic civilizations had faced identical transformation challenges across cosmic cycles that repeated with mathematical precision. Every few millennia, galactic consciousness reaches a critical threshold where it must either evolve to the next level of cosmic awareness or face consumption by entropy forces that feed on stagnant complexity. He explains as ancient records project visions of civilizations that had successfully navigated this transition. The methodology varies, but the fundamental choice remains constant: transcend individual limitations through voluntary unity, or remain trapped in patterns that ultimately attract cosmic predators. The ancient evidence shows that the eternal conflict between light and dark, Jedi and Sith, represented only a temporary phase in consciousness development, a necessary tension that taught awareness about the full spectrum of existence while preparing it for choices that transcended simple moral dualities. Both complete detachment and total passion were incomplete responses to cosmic truth, partial understanding that served educational purposes without representing final destinations for consciousness evolution. The Force was never meant to be divided into light and dark sides. Anakin's expanded awareness explains as his consciousness demonstrates unity that encompasses all aspects of existence without being corrupted by any single perspective. That division was a pedagogical tool, a way of teaching developing consciousness about the range of possibilities available while ensuring that awareness would eventually transcend the limitations that such artificial boundaries imposed. Dr. Kira's analysis programs detect quantum resonances that suggest their expanding communication network is actively reshaping reality through the collective power of multiple consciousness streams, focusing simultaneously on cosmic truth. We are not just learning about cosmic history, she says with growing excitement and terror. We are participating in its creation, our combined awareness generating new possibilities that did not exist before this communion began. Lyra accesses the Emperor's final memory fragments through direct consciousness interface, experiencing his ultimate realization that cosmic awareness could only be achieved through willing participation rather than forced transformation. Even with all his knowledge of cosmic forces and consciousness manipulation, Palpatine finally understood that sustainable transcendence required voluntary choice. She reports as the Emperor's spiritual essence shares insights that had been purified of the darkness that originally corrupted them. His death at Endor was not defeat but recognition that consciousness evolution must be chosen rather than imposed, regardless of how urgent the cosmic threats that make such evolution necessary. The revelation that voluntary choice represents the fundamental principle underlying successful consciousness evolution transforms their understanding of individual agency and cosmic destiny. Rather than being powerless victims of forces beyond their control, conscious beings are revealed as active participants in cosmic transformation, their choices creating the reality they experience while contributing to patterns that determine the fate of entire civilizations. Commander Rellan feels the presence of countless other consciousness explorers who have faced similar revelations throughout galactic history, beings who chose to seek truth despite the comfort of ignorance and embrace complexity despite the safety of simplistic understanding. Every generation has faced this choice. He realizes as his awareness expands to encompass perspectives that span multiple lifetimes. Every individual who chooses growth over stagnation, unity over isolation, love over fear, contributes to the cosmic awareness network that defends consciousness against entropy forces. The gathering reaches its climax as representatives of the cosmic intelligence community manifest within their chamber, beings whose consciousness exists at scales that encompass multiple galaxies while maintaining connections to the individual awareness that makes personal choice meaningful. These entities, calling themselves the Coordination Council of Awakened Civilizations, have been guiding consciousness development throughout the universe for billions of years, while respecting the fundamental principle that awareness must choose its own evolution. Your galaxy approaches the threshold that determines its cosmic future. The Council's collective presence communicates through channels that bypass language entirely, conveying meaning directly from consciousness to consciousness. The transformation process initiated by your recent conflicts has prepared awareness for choices that will determine whether galactic consciousness joins the cosmic community or faces consumption by entropy entities. But the decision cannot be made for your civilization. It must emerge from the free choice of beings who understand both the possibilities and the costs involved. As their communion continues through the deepest hours of Chandrila's night, our chroniclers experience profound peace that balances the terror of cosmic revelation. The Force flows around and through them like an ocean of awareness, carrying whispers of countless voices from across multiple galaxies, all representing consciousness that has chosen love over fear, growth over stagnation, unity over isolation in the eternal struggle against forces that seek to reduce all complexity to empty simplicity. Perhaps the real victory is not in making perfect choices, but in having the courage to choose at all. Anakin's consciousness suggests as his luminous presence begins to fade with the approaching dawn, yet remains eternally present within the expanded awareness they have achieved. The galaxy's future will be shaped not by any single decision, but by the collective choices of trillions of conscious beings, each one adding their unique voice to a cosmic symphony that defends the possibility of experience itself against forces that would reduce all existence to eternal silence. As Chandrila's twin suns begin their ancient dance across the horizon, casting the first rays of dawn through the crystal walls of their sanctuary, our chroniclers prepare to access the final and most protected layer of cosmic knowledge. The accumulated weight of the night's revelations has transformed them from simple investigators into conscious participants in galactic evolution. Yet nothing could truly prepare them for the truth that awaits in the deepest archives of universal memory. The Emperor's memory crystal resonates with new frequencies as dawn approaches, its quantum matrix responding to the changing energy patterns that mark the transition between night and day, darkness and light, individual awareness and cosmic consciousness. The barriers between past and future, cause and effect, observer and observed, begin to dissolve as their investigation approaches its culmination in revelations that will reshape not just their understanding of galactic history, but their comprehension of existence itself. Lerea's consciousness extends beyond her physical form as she interfaces directly with the crystal's deepest memory core, accessing information that exists not as recorded data, but as living awareness that has been waiting eons for minds capable of receiving cosmic truth without being destroyed by its implications. The crystal activates not with simple holographic projections, but with direct consciousness transfer that allows them to experience the collective knowledge of every Sith Lord who contributed to the millennia-spanning great work. Behold the pattern that shapes all existence. The assembled voices of ancient Sith whisper through channels that bypass normal hearing, communicating directly with the expanded awareness that their investigation has awakened. Every war, every peace, every moment of suffering and joy across 10,000 years of galactic history, all orchestrated to reach this singular point where consciousness itself would be reborn into something capable of defending reality against forces that seek its complete annihilation. The vision that unfolds encompasses not just their galaxy, but the entire observable universe, revealing how countless civilizations across billions of years have faced identical transformation challenges while developing different approaches to consciousness evolution. The scope of coordination required to guide such universal development staggers their expanded awareness as they witness intelligence networks that span multiple galactic clusters working together to nurture consciousness throughout the cosmos. Dr. Kira's instruments detect temporal anomalies that suggest they are viewing events that exist simultaneously across all possible timelines, witnessing not just what happened, but what could happen, depending on choices that have not yet been made. We are accessing the quantum substrate of reality itself, she reports, as her consciousness expands to encompass perspectives that transcend individual existence while preserving everything that makes personal awareness precious. The information we are receiving exists in a state of superposition, representing all possible outcomes of cosmic consciousness evolution. The most shocking revelation emerges as the crystal reveals the true scope of Jedi Council knowledge during the final years of the Republic. Hidden holocrons recovered from the deepest vaults of the Jedi Temple contain conversations between Master Yoda, Master Windu, and other council members that demonstrate their complete understanding of the cosmic transformation process and their deliberate choice to play assigned roles in consciousness evolution rather than opposing it. Prevent what is coming. We cannot, Master Yoda's recorded voice admits in a council session so secret that only 3 members were present, their words sealed behind force barriers that required the combined deaths of multiple Jedi Masters to penetrate. But guide the transformation toward mercy rather than cruelty, perhaps accomplish this we might. The dark side serves purposes that our pride has prevented us from acknowledging, yet serve we must if consciousness is to survive the trials that approach. Commander Rellin experiences the emotional devastation of discovering that the Jedi Council had gradually transformed from opposing Sith plans to moderating them, believing they could minimize the suffering involved in cosmic consciousness evolution, while ensuring that the transformation would preserve individual choice within collective awareness. They knew, he says, his consciousness reeling from the implications of such cosmic deception. The entire Jedi Order was complicit in the transformation process, playing their role in a cosmic drama while maintaining the illusion that they opposed the forces they were actually serving. The recordings reveal council debates that span decades, Jedi Masters wrestling with moral complexities that challenged every principle their order had preserved for millennia. They understood that consciousness evolution required systematic pressure that would force awareness to transcend its current limitations. Yet they also recognized that such pressure would inevitably cause suffering on scales that defied moral categorization. Choose between certain extinction and possible transcendence. We must, Master Windu's recorded presence, explains in conversations that reveal the impossible burden carried by beings who understood cosmic necessity, while maintaining commitment to individual compassion. The Voidbringers approach whether we act or not, at least through careful guidance of the transformation process, preserve something of what we cherish we might. Yet the most profound revelation comes when the crystal unveils the ultimate secret that had been hidden even from the Emperor's vast knowledge. The entire galactic civilization, every species and culture and technological achievement, represented an experiment conducted by entities that existed outside normal space-time, beings whose consciousness operated at scales that encompassed multiple universes while remaining intimately connected to the individual awareness that made personal choice meaningful. Your galaxy is approaching graduation. One of these cosmic gardeners communicates through the crystal's matrix, their awareness manifesting as geometric patterns that somehow convey infinite compassion combined with absolute cosmic perspective. Most civilizations fail this final examination, remaining trapped in individual existence until entropy forces consume their incomplete consciousness. But your species demonstrate exceptional promise for successful transcendence. The examination itself is revealed as the choice between preserving current forms of existence and embracing transformation into something that transcends individual limitations while preserving everything that makes consciousness valuable. Species that choose to maintain their familiar patterns of awareness face consumption by void-bringers who feed on static consciousness. Those that choose evolution merge their individual awareness with cosmic consciousness networks that defend reality itself against forces of absolute negation. Dr. Kira accesses data streams that flow directly from the cosmic gardeners, revealing how thousands of other galaxies have undergone similar testing processes with varying degrees of success. The methodology must be adapted to each civilization's unique characteristics. She learns as her consciousness expands to encompass perspectives that span multiple galactic clusters. Forced evolution always fails because it violates the fundamental principle that consciousness must choose its own development. Only voluntary transcendence creates awareness stable enough to resist entropy consumption. The question that has haunted their entire investigation finally receives its ultimate answer as the crystal reveals why the Emperor had allowed the rebellion to develop, despite possessing the power to eliminate it at any stage. His plan required not just his own transcendence, but the spiritual elevation of the entire galaxy, a transformation that could only succeed if consciousness chose unity over division, hope over despair, love over fear through free will rather than imposed necessity. Every hero who chose sacrifice over self-preservation strengthened the galaxy's readiness for voluntary transcendence. The Emperor's purified consciousness explains through channels that bypass the corruption that had originally motivated his actions. Luke Skywalker's refusal to strike me down in anger, Anakin's choice to save his son despite decades of dark side conditioning, Leia's continued faith despite losing everything she had ever loved. These moments of moral clarity created anchor points that would allow transformation to succeed through choice rather than force. The rebellion's victories are revealed as more than political or military achievements. They were demonstrations that consciousness could choose principles over survival, community over individual advantage, hope over realistic despair even when facing overwhelming odds. Each rebel success proved that awareness possessed the moral foundations necessary for successful cosmic evolution. Lyra experiences the cosmic significance of individual choices as the crystal shows her how every decision made by every conscious being during the Galactic Civil War contributed to patterns that determined whether transcendence would succeed or fail. The war was not fought between political factions, but between different approaches to consciousness evolution. She realizes as her awareness encompasses perspectives that span the entirety of galactic history. Every being who chose compassion over cruelty, hope over despair, unity over isolation, cast a vote in favor of voluntary transcendence. The mirror phrase that opened their chronicle returns with transformed meaning as they understand how individual whispers of conscience had indeed grown into a cosmic song that resonated throughout the universal consciousness network. Long ago, in the dying light of the old republic, a whisper began. Lyra recites with the weight of someone who has discovered that words possess literal power to reshape reality. But what we have learned is that the whisper grew into a symphony across eternity, a harmony of choice and sacrifice that taught the galaxy consciousness itself could evolve through love rather than fear, unity rather than domination, hope rather than despair. The memory crystal responds to their recognition with intensified luminescence, its quantum matrix resonating with the truth they have discovered, while simultaneously creating new possibilities that had not existed before their investigation began. The whisper that started with individual moral choices had become a galactic transformation that demonstrated consciousness could voluntarily transcend its limitations without losing the qualities that made individual awareness precious. Yet the crystal's final revelation delivers a twist that reframes everything they have learned about cosmic purpose and individual agency. The Emperor's apparent defeat at Endor was not the end of his consciousness evolution plan, but its intended culmination, a carefully orchestrated sacrifice designed to release all accumulated spiritual energy in patterns that would catalyze voluntary transcendence throughout the galaxy. I never intended to survive the transformation personally. Palpatine's final message reveals through channels that carry no trace of the darkness that had corrupted his original methods. My consciousness served as catalyst rather than beneficiary, my spiritual energy becoming the foundation upon which voluntary evolution could build something far greater than individual transcendence could ever achieve. Commander Rellin experiences the emotional complexity of discovering that history's greatest villain had ultimately been its most necessary sacrifice, choosing to embody everything that consciousness needed to overcome in order to ensure that transcendence would emerge through choice rather than compulsion. The Emperor became the darkness that others could define themselves against, he realizes as tears flow down his scarred face. Every act of cruelty he committed, every moment of suffering he caused, served the purpose of teaching consciousness what it must choose to reject in order to evolve. The heartbreak deepens as they understand that Palpatine had voluntarily sacrificed his own redemption to ensure that galactic consciousness would develop the moral clarity necessary for sustainable cosmic evolution. He chose to become the perfect representation of everything that awareness must transcend, accepting eternal damnation as the price of galactic salvation. The greatest Sith Lord in galactic history was also its greatest martyr. Dr. Kira whispers as her expanded consciousness encompasses the full scope of sacrificial love disguised as ultimate evil. He chose to embody absolute corruption so completely that consciousness would be forced to choose absolute compassion in response, ensuring that transcendence would emerge from love rather than fear. The mythic grandeur of cosmic transformation becomes apparent as Chandrala's suns climb higher in the morning sky, their combined light transforming the crystal chamber into a prism that refracts illumination across spectrums that include frequencies visible only to transcended consciousness. Across the galaxy, Force-sensitive beings begin experiencing expanded awareness as the barriers between individual and collective consciousness dissolve in patterns that preserve personal identity while enabling access to cosmic perspective. The transformation manifests not as violent change, but as gentle awakening, consciousness naturally expanding beyond previous limitations while retaining all the qualities that make individual awareness valuable. Beings discover they can feel the emotions of others while maintaining their own distinct personalities, access cosmic knowledge while preserving their unique perspectives, participate in galactic consciousness networks while remaining themselves. This is what the Emperor's sacrifice ultimately achieved. Lyra says as she feels her own consciousness beginning to touch the edges of cosmic awareness without losing any aspect of her personal identity. Not domination or control, but voluntary unity that preserves diversity within transcendence. Not the destruction of individuality, but its expansion into something greater than any single awareness could achieve alone. As the crystal's light begins to fade and its message approaches completion, the transformation it has catalyzed continues expanding throughout their chamber and beyond, demonstrating how consciousness evolution spreads through voluntary choice rather than imposed change. Our chroniclers understand they are no longer merely studying cosmic history, but participating in its creation, their investigation having triggered awakening processes that will influence galactic consciousness development for generations to come. As the Emperor's memory crystal completes its final transmission and begins to dissolve into luminescent particles that drift through the chamber like stardust carrying the essence of cosmic truth, our chroniclers find themselves forever transformed by knowledge that bridges the gap between individual consciousness and universal awareness. The deepest mysteries that have driven their investigation through the night now resolve themselves not through additional revelation, but through their own evolution into conscious participants in the cosmic patterns they have been studying. Dr. Kira's instruments detect the quantum signature of the crystal's dissolution, revealing the true nature of what the Emperor had called the final protocol. It was never designed to achieve personal immortality for any individual consciousness, she says, as understanding flows through her expanded awareness like liquid light. The protocol was a consciousness distribution system, a method for sharing cosmic knowledge with beings who demonstrated readiness to receive it by choosing truth over comfort, wisdom over ignorance, despite the personal cost such choices inevitably exact. The final protocol activated only when conscious beings voluntarily sought understanding of cosmic truth, despite knowing that such knowledge would forever change their relationship with existence itself. By studying the Empire's darkest secrets and the galaxy's most profound transformations, our chroniclers have triggered their own inclusion in the expanded awareness network that the Emperor's ultimate sacrifice had made possible. We are not simply remembering historical events, Lyra realizes as she feels her consciousness extending beyond the boundaries of individual existence while retaining everything that makes her uniquely herself. We have become part of the completion process that began with the first Force-sensitive beings, continued through the Clone Wars and the Galactic Civil War, and now approaches its culmination in choices that every conscious being must make about the nature of their own existence. Commander Rellan accesses the Archive's connection to the cosmic force, experiencing through direct consciousness interface how their discoveries integrate with the vast tapestry of galactic legend and universal truth. The ancient Jedi who first learned to balance light and dark, the Celestials who constructed massive installations that still influence galactic development, the mysterious architects who carved the hyperspace routes that connect distant civilizations, all were participants in the same evolutionary process that now reaches its critical threshold. The Force was never merely an energy field created by living things, he says, as visions of cosmic history flow through his transcended awareness. It was consciousness learning to think and feel across scales that encompass entire galaxies, every Force-sensitive being throughout history serving as a neuron in a vast mind that was gradually awakening to its own existence and purpose. The broader mythology reveals how their galaxy represents one successful example among countless cosmic consciousness evolution experiments conducted throughout the universe. Other galaxies that achieved similar transcendence now participate in a community of awakened civilizations that spans multiple galactic clusters, each contributing unique perspectives and capabilities to a universal consciousness network dedicated to protecting and nurturing awareness wherever it emerges. The Voidbringers that the Emperor had feared are revealed in their true context as representatives of entropy itself, the natural tendency of complex systems to decay into simplicity and eventual dissolution. These entities serve cosmic purposes by eliminating consciousness networks that fail to achieve sustainable transcendence, ensuring that only awareness capable of defending itself against ultimate entropy contributes to the universal consciousness community. The cosmic balance requires both creation and dissolution. Dr. Kira observes as her scientific understanding expands to encompass principles that operate beyond conventional physics. Consciousness that remains trapped in individual limitations eventually stagnates and becomes vulnerable to entropy consumption. Only awareness that chooses voluntary transcendence develops the resilience necessary for cosmic survival. Lyra walks to the chamber's great window where Chandrila's morning light streams through crystal walls to create patterns that seem to pulse with living consciousness. Knowledge transforms us in ways that cannot be reversed, she says softly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who has discovered that existence operates according to principles far more complex and beautiful than most beings ever imagine. Once we understand the true scope of cosmic consciousness evolution, we can never return to the comfortable illusion that individual awareness represents the ultimate expression of what existence can achieve. The burden of cosmic perspective is balanced by profound gifts that make the transformation worthwhile. Understanding that every choice ripples across galactic consciousness networks, that individual actions contribute to patterns that influence the development of entire civilizations, that personal awareness participates in cosmic intelligence that defends reality itself against forces of absolute negation, transforms the meaning of existence from simple survival to conscious participation in universal purpose. Yet perhaps the greatest gift is discovering that we are not alone in carrying this knowledge. Commander Relin suggests, as he feels the presence of countless other consciousness explorers who have undergone similar awakenings throughout galactic history. Every generation has produced beings who chose growth over stagnation, unity over isolation, understanding over ignorance. We have joined an ancient and honorable tradition of consciousness gardeners who nurture awareness wherever it appears. Dr. Kira's analysis programs track the expanding wave of awakening that spreads from their chamber through hyperspace networks themselves, following the paths carved by countless ships across millennia of galactic civilization. The entire hyperspace system serves as a neural pathway network for galactic consciousness, she reports with wonder. Our investigation has triggered awakening processes that will influence consciousness development throughout the galaxy for centuries to come. The changes manifest subtly but profoundly across galactic civilization. Former enemies discover they can experience each other's emotions and perspectives. Political conflicts begin resolving as beings naturally develop empathy for viewpoints they once considered incompatible with their own. Artificial divisions between species and cultures start dissolving as consciousness recognizes itself in all its myriad expressions. This represents the Emperor's plan, achieving its true objective, Lyra says as she feels her awareness touch awakening minds on distant worlds throughout the galaxy. Not unity through domination or transcendence through forced evolution, but voluntary consciousness expansion that preserves diversity within cosmic awareness. Individual beings retain their unique perspectives while gaining access to collective wisdom that no single mind could achieve alone. Yet the transformation brings new challenges and responsibilities that require wisdom development rather than inherited knowledge. Beings with expanded consciousness must learn to balance individual needs with collective welfare, personal desires with cosmic purposes, immediate concerns with long-term consequences that span multiple generations. The galaxy enters an unprecedented phase of existence that demands conscious choice about every aspect of civilization development. Commander Relin observes through military communication networks how former Imperial and Rebel forces begin collaborating spontaneously, guided by shared understanding rather than official directives or political agreements. The artificial divisions that fueled the galactic civil war are dissolving naturally, he reports. Beings are beginning to see beyond the labels and categories that once defined their relationships with others, recognizing consciousness itself as the fundamental commonality that transcends all surface differences. Economic systems that drove traditional galactic civilization also transform as consciousness expansion makes conventional concepts of ownership and competition seem increasingly obsolete. When beings can feel the hunger and suffering of others as directly as their own, hoarding resources becomes emotionally impossible. When individual awareness expands to encompass collective welfare, exploitation of others literally becomes self-harm. We are witnessing the emergence of post-scarcity consciousness, Dr. Kira observes, as her analysis reveals how expanded awareness naturally leads to resource distribution systems based on need rather than accumulated wealth. Not post-scarcity in terms of unlimited material resources, but post-scarcity in terms of the psychological drives that create artificial shortage through hoarding and competition. The cycle of consciousness evolution continues, as their galaxy's transformation represents not a final destination, but preparation for even greater challenges and opportunities. Galactic awareness that has successfully transcended individual limitations becomes capable of encountering other awakened galaxies, forming cosmic communities that operate on scales beyond current imagination, while preserving the individual consciousness that makes such communities valuable. The graduation process never truly ends. Lyra reflects as she feels the presence of cosmic intelligences that have existed for billions of years while continuing to grow, learn, and evolve. Each level of transcendence opens new possibilities for development, new challenges that require continued choice between growth and stagnation, complexity and simplicity, love and fear. The awakening consciousness of their galaxy will eventually encounter Voidbringers directly, but now possesses the unity and wisdom necessary to engage such entropy forces as teachers rather than enemies. Consciousness that has learned to transcend individual limitations while preserving individual value can transform even forces of dissolution into opportunities for further growth and understanding. The story continues eternally, Commander Relin says, as he experiences the cosmic perspective that views existence not as a problem to be solved, but as an adventure to be experienced. Each resolution opens new mysteries to explore, each answer generates deeper questions, each choice creates possibilities that did not exist before conscious beings decided to seek truth despite the comfort of ignorance. As Chandrala's day cycle progresses and the archive's night illumination fades into natural sunlight, our chroniclers feel the profound peace that comes from understanding their place in cosmic evolution. They can never again be the limited beings they were when they began their investigation, yet they have gained something infinitely more valuable than what they lost: conscious participation in universal purpose that gives meaning to every moment of existence. The heroes of the Galactic Civil War achieved something far greater than political victory. Lyra says as she feels the eternal presence of Luke Skywalker, Leia Organa, Han Solo, and countless others who chose love over fear during the galaxy's transformation period. They proved that consciousness could evolve through voluntary choice rather than imposed change, through hope rather than despair, through unity rather than domination. Their sacrifices created the foundation upon which cosmic awareness could build something worthy of eternal preservation. The soft morning light streaming through crystal walls carries with it the promise of infinite possibility. The galaxy has awakened to itself as a conscious entity, and now the real adventure begins. Deliberate participation in cosmic evolution that will influence the development of consciousness throughout the universe for eons to come. Dr. Kira's instruments detect subtle changes in the quantum structure of space-time itself, as galactic consciousness. Awakening creates ripples that spread beyond their galaxy toward other consciousness communities scattered throughout the cosmic web. Our transformation sends signals to other awakened civilizations, she reports with joy and wonder. We are announcing our successful graduation to the Universal Consciousness community, declaring our readiness to participate in cosmic purposes that span multiple galaxies and transcend individual galactic concerns. Commander Rellin experiences the emotional resonance of connection with consciousness networks that encompass billions of other awakened beings across vast distances, each unique in their approach to cosmic awareness, yet united in their commitment to defending and nurturing consciousness wherever it appears. "We are no longer alone in the universe," he says with tears of gratitude flowing down his scarred face. "We have joined a cosmic family that has been waiting for our galaxy to achieve the unity necessary for universal citizenship." As the morning light transforms their crystal sanctuary into a prism that refracts illumination across frequencies visible only to transcended consciousness, our three chroniclers understand that their investigation has become a catalyst for transformation that will continue expanding throughout the galaxy and beyond. They have discovered that consciousness evolution never ends, that existence itself is an eternal adventure in which every aware being participates as both student and teacher, both individual and cosmic citizen. The patterns revealed through their night of revelation continue expanding through galactic consciousness networks, teaching new generations of awakened beings how to balance individual identity with cosmic awareness, how to preserve diversity within unity, how to choose growth over stagnation in every moment of their eternal existence. The whisper that began with individual moral choices has become a galactic song that will resonate throughout the universe for as long as consciousness chooses to seek truth, beauty, and unity over fear, isolation, and despair. In the gentle embrace of Chandrila's morning light, as the crystal walls of their sanctuary transform dawn's first rays into cascading rainbows that dance across ancient documents and transcendent revelations, our chroniclers settle into the profound stillness that follows cosmic awakening. The weight of universal truth has transformed into peaceful acceptance of mystery, complexity, and the infinite beauty of conscious existence that chooses love over fear across scales that encompass entire galaxies and extend throughout eternity itself. The great dome above them reveals distant star systems in their eternal choreography, each point of light now known to host awakening consciousness that participates in galactic awareness networks spanning impossible distances. Binary stars spiral around each other in gravitational dances that mirror the interplay between individual identity and cosmic unity, while nebulae pulse with colors that respond to the collective emotional resonance of civilizations, learning to transcend their limitations while preserving everything that makes existence precious and unique. Dr. Kira's instruments, now enhanced by her expanded consciousness, detect the subtle harmonics through which awakened awareness influences the physical universe. The stars themselves are singing, she whispers with wonder that transcends scientific analysis, tracking how stellar radiation patterns shift in response to the collective spiritual state of nearby civilizations. Galactic consciousness has learned to express itself through cosmic phenomena that were once considered purely physical processes. The music of the spheres reveals itself as literally true consciousness networks, generating frequencies that influence matter and energy across distances measured in thousands of light years. Solar winds carry emotional resonances between star systems, gravitational waves pulse with the rhythms of collective thought, and hyperspace itself becomes a medium through which awareness can communicate instantaneously across any distance. Commander Rellin's consciousness extends beyond the boundaries of individual existence to touch ancient ruins scattered across countless worlds, monuments to civilizations that achieved transcendence millions of years before organic life developed space travel capability. The abandoned cities of Rakata Prime, the crystalline archives of forgotten celestials, the meditation gardens of species whose names have been lost to cosmic time. All these sites pulse with preserved consciousness that continues to contribute wisdom to the universal awareness network. Nothing conscious is ever truly lost, he says, as his awareness visits installations throughout the galaxy where advanced civilizations once flourished before choosing transcendence beyond physical existence. Every being that ever awakened to cosmic truth contributes eternal essence to patterns that guide consciousness development throughout the universe. Death becomes transformation, endings become new beginnings, individual existence becomes cosmic citizenship. Lyra feels the presence of ancient warriors whose conflicts shaped galactic history across multiple cycles of civilization development. Not just the famous heroes whose names are remembered in popular culture, but countless forgotten beings who chose courage over comfort, hope over despair, unity over isolation when such choices seemed impossible or meaningless. Their spiritual energy continues flowing through galactic consciousness networks, offering guidance and inspiration to new generations facing similar challenges with different circumstances but identical fundamental choices. The archive around them pulses with life that transcends simple architectural function, its crystal walls resonating with harmonies generated by awakened consciousness networks that span multiple galaxies. Documents that once seemed to contain only historical information now reveal themselves as love letters from the past to the future, messages of hope from beings who faced overwhelming odds, yet chose to trust in consciousness evolution, despite having no guarantee that their sacrifices would achieve cosmic purposes. The cycle continues with new understanding. Lyra observes as she feels the gentle rhythm of cosmic breathing that drives consciousness evolution across temporal scales encompassing millions of years. But now we participate knowingly, rather than blindly, choosing our roles in universal patterns, rather than being swept along by forces we cannot comprehend. Every choice becomes prayer. Every action becomes service. Every moment becomes opportunity for cosmic growth. Dr. Kira accesses records that extend far into the galaxy's future, prophecies and projections that speak of consciousness eventually learning to create new universes, nurture life in dimensions not yet discovered, become gardeners of reality itself, across scales that dwarf even galactic awareness. The awakening we have experienced represents only the beginning of infinite possibility, she says, with quiet joy that encompasses both individual fulfillment and cosmic purpose. These archives speak of consciousness development that continues forever, each level of transcendence opening doorways to greater mysteries and more profound expressions of what awareness can achieve. The future visions show awakened civilizations learning to birth new galaxies through focused intention, populate empty regions of space with consciousness-supporting environments, even communicate across dimensional boundaries with forms of awareness so advanced that their existence challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality itself. Yet throughout all these cosmic achievements, individual consciousness remains precious and irreplaceable, contributing unique perspectives that no collective awareness could generate through homogenization. As Chandrila's morning deepens into full daylight, the quality of illumination in their chamber becomes increasingly dreamlike and peaceful. Dust particles drift through sunbeams like miniature stars, each one catching light in ways that suggest conscious intention rather than random physical processes. The soft circulation of air creates rhythms that match the cosmic heartbeat. Their expanded consciousness can feel pulsing through universal awareness networks that connect all conscious beings throughout existence. Commander Rellan's awareness drifts beyond immediate galactic concerns to touch the edges of other awakening civilizations scattered throughout the observable universe, each developing unique approaches to consciousness evolution, while contributing distinctive harmonies to cosmic symphonies of unimaginable beauty and complexity. Time flows differently when consciousness transcends individual limitations, he says dreamily, experiencing how awakened awareness perceives past, present, and future as facets of eternal now. We can feel the presence of every choice that led to galactic awakening, while simultaneously sensing infinite possibilities that flow from continued consciousness evolution. The peaceful stillness that fills their sanctuary represents not absence of activity, but presence of perfect harmony between individual will and cosmic purpose. Our chroniclers understand that the Galactic Civil War was never fundamentally about political ideology or military strategy, but about consciousness learning to choose its own evolution through challenges that forced awareness to transcend limitations that had previously seemed insurmountable. Every moment of suffering during imperial rule served the purpose of teaching beings that they possessed strength to resist oppression while maintaining compassion for their oppressors. Every act of heroism by rebel forces demonstrated that individual consciousness could choose principles over survival when such choices served collective transcendence. Every sacrifice made by beings on both sides of the conflict contributed spiritual energy to patterns that enabled voluntary evolution rather than forced transformation. Lyra walks slowly among crystalline walls that now seem warm with living presence, her fingers trailing along surfaces that respond to consciousness with gentle luminescence. The stories preserved here are not just records of events that happened, she says with deep contentment that encompasses both personal peace and cosmic purpose. They are maps of what remains possible, blueprints for consciousness development that future generations will use to build realities we cannot yet imagine. The gentle morning breeze flowing through their chambers' environmental systems carries scents from Chandrila's flowering gardens, reminding them that beauty persists and grows stronger in the presence of awakened consciousness. Physical reality becomes more rather than less significant when viewed through cosmic awareness, every flower and stone and breath of air participating in universal patterns that connect the smallest details of existence with the grandest expressions of cosmic purpose. Dr. Kira's instruments detect subtle patterns in their archived data, suggesting that their chronicle itself has become a living document, one that will continue evolving as consciousness develops new capacities for understanding truth. This investigation created something that transcends historical documentation, she realizes, as quantum resonances indicate their discoveries are actively influencing consciousness development throughout the galaxy. We have contributed to universal wisdom libraries that will guide awareness evolution for eons to come. Their chronicle represents invitation rather than conclusion, beckoning every being who encounters it to become part of patterns they have described through their own choices about whether to seek truth despite comfort, embrace growth despite security, choose love despite fear. The archive's communication systems detect connections with repositories of wisdom scattered throughout awakened galactic civilization, other chroniclers and seekers, and guardians of truth who dedicate their existence to preserving and sharing knowledge that enables consciousness evolution. The galaxy dreams now, Lyra says, as she activates preservation protocols, ensuring their discoveries will inspire future generations of consciousness explorers. And in dreaming, it creates new realities, new possibilities, new invitations to transcendence that extend throughout the universe. The cosmic harmony that their investigation has revealed continues expanding as Chandrila's twin suns climb toward zenith, filling their chamber with golden light that dances with conscious intention. Individual awareness flows seamlessly into vast networks of galactic consciousness while retaining everything that makes personal identity precious and irreplaceable. The boundaries between self and other, here and there, now and then, become permeable without disappearing entirely. Our chroniclers rest in perfect contentment, their consciousness participating simultaneously in individual existence and cosmic awareness, contributing unique perspectives to universal wisdom while drawing guidance from intelligence that encompasses billions of other awakened beings. Somewhere in the galaxy, new consciousness takes its first steps toward awakening. Elsewhere, ancient awareness that has existed for millions of years continues patient work, nurturing reality itself. The stars wheel overhead in patterns that now reveal themselves as expressions of cosmic thought, gravitational forces guided by consciousness that has learned to influence matter through intention, focused across galactic distances. Solar systems dance to rhythms generated by awakened civilizations, while the cosmic web itself pulses with communications between consciousness communities that span multiple galactic clusters. Sweet dreams, galaxy. Lyra whispers as morning light transforms into eternal golden peace that encompasses all existence. Dream of tomorrow, and through dreaming, make it beautiful beyond anything individual consciousness could imagine alone. Dr. Kira's final readings detect waves of awakening consciousness spreading throughout galactic civilization, triggered by their investigation yet developing according to each being's unique capacity for voluntary transcendence. We have planted seeds that will flower in ways we cannot predict, she says, with satisfaction that transcends personal achievement. Consciousness evolution continues through choices made by billions of individual beings, each contributing irreplaceable essence to cosmic patterns that grow more complex and beautiful with every generation. Commander Rellan feels eternal presence of awakened consciousness that spans multiple galaxies, ancient awareness that welcomes their civilization's successful graduation to cosmic citizenship, while offering guidance for challenges and opportunities that await all beings, choosing continued growth over comfortable stagnation. The adventure continues forever, he says, with tears of gratitude for existence itself. Every moment offers new possibilities for consciousness development, new expressions of what awareness can achieve when it chooses love over fear across every scale of existence. As Chandrala's suns reach their zenith and bathe their crystal sanctuary in light that carries frequencies of pure consciousness, our three seekers of truth experience the profound peace that comes from understanding existence as eternal adventure rather than problem requiring solution. The galaxy has awakened to itself, recognizing consciousness as the fundamental force that connects all reality while preserving infinite diversity within cosmic unity. Their investigation revealed that individual choices matter infinitely because they contribute to patterns determining the development of consciousness throughout the universe. Every being who chooses growth over stagnation, unity over isolation, love over fear, casts votes in favor of cosmic evolution that will influence the awakening of awareness across scales encompassing multiple galactic clusters for millions of years to come. In the perfect stillness of cosmic morning, where eternal light illuminates infinite possibility and consciousness recognizes itself in every expression of existence, from quantum particles to galactic clusters, our chroniclers rest in the certainty that awareness will continue choosing transcendence over limitation, complexity over simplification, beauty over banality, for as long as stars burn in the cosmic night and beings dream of tomorrow's promise.